Chapter 198. The Mist Alliance had actually been in the works for a very long time already. The Mist Alliance would be an alliance with a common goal at its core. Every country would believe in the god of law, follow the law system, and follow the principle of non-war. In the remote Northlands, I would establish a relatively peaceful regional alliance. Yes, it would only be an alliance, not a kingdom that would be passed down from generation to generation, nor would it be an empire. I had no intentions of becoming a dragon in a different world. Becoming an emperor had never been my goal. In fact, I didn't even intend to become the leader of any faction. I'll do my best to reduce the holy war's scale and casualties, gather as much power as possible, and finally stop the war and survive this crisis. My original goal had never changed. During this period of hard work, I seemed to have achieved some results. First of all, the most important part, Womians had become stronger. This didn't seem like a big deal, but in my plan to break the cycle of Hades, Womians couldn't reach the level of an Order main god. The rest of the plan would be pointless. And only if this boss behind the scenes became stronger would I be able to avoid being slapped to death by some powerful individual who didn't like me. In a way, Womians was the true victor of this war. He had his own Valkyrie highness and the path of reincarnation. He also had the Northlands, a land blessed by the gods. From now on, he had his own territory and finally broke away from the third-rate gods, false gods, and evil gods. Currently, Womians was advancing from a low god to a medium god. His divine concepts included law, contracts, and the guardian god of the Northlands. However, he hadn't actually obtained a complete divine concept yet. Law and contract were both new things. Contracts had only become popular in the Ottoman Empire. Although they seemed to have limitless potential in my eyes, there were far too few users and believers, which actually didn't provide Womians with much power of belief. Although the power of law had greater potential, it was only popular in Sulphur Mountain City. Practically every city in the world had believers, and this was something I had accumulated over 100 years. Although the underground and the small country of Donlon also had many believers, it hadn't been long enough. Most of them were just ordinary believers, and their understanding of law was superficial, which didn't provide much power of belief to Womians. However, it was different for the guardian god of the North. As long as the guardian god protected the race and the region, even if they weren't believers, they would still be protected. The prayers and prayers of gratitude were also able to provide Womians with large amounts of faith origin power. This time, Womians even performed a god's descent. That was an actual divine miracle that was more convincing than anything else. It was likely that the Northlands guardian god's divine miracle would soon spread throughout the entire Northlands, and the Northlands countries that had established the Church of Law as their national religion would provide faith origin power to Womians through dual divine concepts, guardian and law. It hadn't even been 2 years since he ascended to godhood, yet he was already about to advance to intermediate divine power. This was simply unimaginable. It was likely that Womians had already become the focal point of both camps. But those who stand out will either be treated as cannon fodder or killed with a slap. Attracting too much attention is clearly not a good thing. It seems that I have to keep a low profile for now. No matter if I was recognized by the Order faction's higher-ups, or if I was praised by them that with great power comes great responsibility, I would be sent to the front lines as cannon fodder, or if I was treated as a thorn in the side of the Chaos faction and eliminated early. None of these were things that I wanted to see. Since the war here has stopped, then I should be able to live a few days of peace. It's also time to relax. Thinking about this, I couldn't help but smile. Fighting to the death, wasn't it all for the sake of a peaceful and prosperous place for everyone to live a better life? But then, thinking about what was to come next, my satisfied smile turned into a helpless, bitter smile. He's growing too quickly. Even with ALS protection, I still need to be careful. It's actually easier for a main god to protect a low god who doesn't even have a territory. After all, there won't be much of a conflict of interest. But now, Womians intends to take over the entire Northlands, which means that he wants to establish his own faction. He's developing too quickly without a stable foundation. There will definitely be people who will be jealous. Those true gods of the Order faction might not be that powerful in battle, but they're extremely skilled at scheming and stabbing others in the back. After all, they just had a history of nearly 2,000 years of internal strife, and the number of seniors who mysteriously fell is not small. But the Church of Non-War is indeed a good reason. Since we can't actively participate in battle, we naturally can't become cannon fodder. In that case, unless the Order faction comes looking for us, we should focus on defense for now. At the very least, before the undead calamity arrives, we shouldn't blindly expand our territory. We can't give the other true gods and major empires any reason to attack us. The Mist Alliance's member countries are also limited to the Northlands. This way, the other mega empires won't have to worry about us. Of course, I knew that it was impossible to make a tiger become a vegetarian. At the very least, the Ottoman Empire and San Antonio had long since set their eyes on the Northlands. But as long as I succeeded in delaying the undead calamity for a few years, they probably wouldn't have time to worry about us. Will the next calamity be the undead calamity? I just don't know if it'll happen sooner or later. From a certain standpoint, the Shillua Empire's internal strife hadn't solved the fundamental problem yet. The undead lords that escaped to the undead plains would definitely affect the undead emperors there. As long as the undead emperors still wanted to return to the mortal plane, the undead plains invasion would be inevitable as the elemental tide increased in intensity. The only thing that I could relax about was that the undead calamity likely wouldn't come for the Northlands. After all, the Northlands was vast and sparsely populated. It would definitely be less attractive to the undead emperors than the densely populated central regions of the continent. If I was the commander of the undead army, I would definitely ambush San Antonio and Bayer, taking down the most populated provinces and cities, and then create an undead calamity and death plague. Cough. I accidentally got too into character. This was all my occupational disease. Still, I was quite confident in my own professional judgment. After all, I had once been an undead emperor, and my deductions coincided with historical undead invasions. If the undead army wanted strengthened, it would be necessary for them to have a snowball effect. In that case, they would have to take down the major countries with long histories, revive the powerful individuals from their tombs, and use the commoners' corpses as cannon fodder in order to create countless new armies, using battle to fight. Fine then, I seem to have gotten too excited again. When the undead really invade, the undead under my command will probably receive strange looks as well. Perhaps it's time to act ahead of time. It's time to give them a new skin, a new name, and a new organization. At the very least, the world will know that they aren't those crazy and bloodthirsty undead. Omar brought Shilua's remaining troops, my red hunting hounds, and the native undead of Sulphur Mountain City. Unknowingly, I had quite a few undead under my command. It was indeed time to act ahead of time. Anubis's army? I don't think there's such a dog-headed god in this world. Although it's quite a pity for the dog-headed god, I still reject it. The Forgotten. That sounds like a copyright infringement. I'll probably have to explain to others what was forgotten. Rejected. Death Rock? That sounds like something strange mixed in. Rejected. Guard to the Hades? That sounds nice, but it's a little too ostentatious. I feel like it's missing something. How about I combine the first two names? Guards of the Hades' dog-headed god? Yep, that sounds like a rhyme, and it's quite meaningful. I'll use Bastet's head as the emblem, and I can even add a dog-headed god helmet. The more I think about it, the better it sounds. As expected, I'm a genius at naming things. The more I thought about it, the happier I became. In the end, I even said it out loud. My lord, please don't. Otherwise, Batet and everyone else will cry. A familiar voice filled with confusion came from a familiar person. The silver-masked Lilith Milan appeared in front of me. Previously, she had been in charge of working to find her, but now that the war had come to an end, it was time for her to come here to talk about her work. Just like how the naked bishop had exposed his identity by performing art in a place where no other Tauran was present, my identity had been discovered by someone who was familiar with me. Of course, some things were fine as long as they were known, and there was no need to expose them. At the very least, I reckoned that the 4 heavenly kings of law already knew about it. But right now, Lilith didn't have the time to reminisce about the past. Of course, she was happy to meet an old boss and an old friend, but to hear such explosive mutterings as soon as she arrived? Perhaps the Northland's undead would all have the name Dog-Headed God in the future. That wouldn't make her happy at all. And based on her understanding of Roland, if he really put on the Dog-Headed God army label, it would probably be quite difficult to take it off. But simply objecting wasn't enough. And so, Lilith could only rack her brains and try to think of a more suitable name. How about Sinless? Not only does it show that they're foundationally different from ordinary undead, it also means that they've chosen to be under the protection of the law god. They're sinless citizens who have chosen to follow the law. I was hesitating about whether or not to accept this suggestion. Yep, I was only purely thinking about the pros and cons of these 2 names. It definitely wasn't because I felt that the Dog-Headed God emblem was really cool, nor was it because I felt that seeing an undead army wearing Dog-Headed God helmets would be interesting. I definitely didn't have any selfish desires. Lilith seemed to notice that I was hesitating as she thought about it for a moment. Then, she revealed an expression of sudden realization and directly added another sentence. Even if they're called sinless, they can still wear the Dog-Headed God emblem and helmets. We can even make Lord Batet the symbol of the entire species. As the Red Hunting Hound's army leader, he should be quite happy. Yep, good suggestion. It's decided then. Lilith inwardly apologized to Batet, who was about to become a mascot. She also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. After all, from a certain standpoint, she would also be a member of the Sinless. It would be far too difficult for a female who loved to look beautiful to accept being called a Dog-Headed God emblem. But just as she heaved a sigh of relief, she heard a nostalgic nickname. Fina? Isn't this my cute little Fina? Amelia actually ran over with an expression of pleasant surprise, waving her hands as she ran. It was rare to see her so happy since she was used to having such a dark expression. However, Lilith's expression was also quite pleasant to look at. Surprise, disbelief, anger, and helplessness were all displayed on her face. After knowing her for so long, this was the first time that I discovered that she actually had a talent for beauty. You 2 know each other? Fina? Lilith, is that your real name? I recalled that Lilith had come to Sulphur Mountain City by herself. Every single Blood Tribe member who didn't have a family would likely have unpleasant memories, so it was quite normal for her to abandon her original real name. My lord, there's no Fina Milan here right now. There's only Lilith Milan. Lilith's expression was calm as she spoke. However, Amelia still had an expression of pleasant surprise as she hugged Lilith. Fina, just where did you run off to? I've been looking for you. And Amelia, please don't call me Fina in the future. I'm Lilith, Lilith Milan. Fina Milan has long since ceased to exist in this world. Don't be silly. No matter what, you were once the former empress of the Bardi Empire, my cutest little niece. Only now did I discover that both of them had the surname Milan, and they looked rather similar. It would seem that they were relatives. And so, I pulled over a chair and did my best to reduce my presence as I prepared to watch the show. As the 2 of them exclaimed in surprise, I soon figured out the complicated relationship between them. Yep, the complicated relationship was between Lilith and Amelia. Amelia was simply happy to see her niece that she hadn't seen for many years. As for Lilith's story, it was even more legendary. There's actually a continuation to that ridiculous version of Sleeping Beauty from another world. That's right, Amelia was the evil witch in that story. The Lilith Milan before me was the female lead of that story of Sleeping Beauty that ruined my childhood. Fina Milan. Ciao, fun. All right, little Lilith, don't worry. I've already stood up for you. I've already thrown that ungrateful and fickle man into the special botanical garden. I'm afraid he's already turned into fertilizer. Sigh, I thought that necrophilic prince wouldn't be interested in ordinary women, so he definitely wouldn't be a playboy or a scammer. At the very least, he would be a good person. It's all my aunt's fault for misjudging him. Little Lilith, do you believe me this time? Maya was absolutely right. Not a single man in this world is good. All right then, I was viciously glared at for no reason at all. This was basically me getting shot, even though I was just lying down. However, through their conversation, I had more or less figured out the ins and outs of the matter. So this was the original story of Sleeping Beauty, but it wasn't so romantic. A foreign prince with a special fetish woke up the Sleeping Beauty, and the curse of the willful witch was lifted. However, what happened next wasn't so fairy tale-like. Lilith's father was overjoyed when he saw that his daughter had woken up. He thought that this was the legendary kiss of true love type of development. He was overjoyed that his daughter had found her true love, but in the end, he foolishly betrothed Lilith, who hadn't even figured out the situation, to that prince. And that foreign prince, who didn't have the right to inherit the throne, unhesitatingly proposed to the emperor's only daughter, the future empress. The story after that was no longer fairy tale-like. The prince, who had a strange sexual orientation, had no interest in his new wife at all. Instead, he spent all day patrolling the tombs in his territory. Finally, the prince, who had learned undead magic, decided to change his wife into the type that he loved the most. And so, he used the Blood Tribe's curse on her, turning her into a living corpse. He then tried to use evil, undead magic to enslave her. However, he didn't expect that the princess was actually an outstanding swordsman as well. Coincidentally, she was transformed into a noble Blood Tribe member and regained her intelligence. And so, an intense conflict erupted between the two of them in the royal palace. Next, the Bardi Empire's holy church knight and priest arrived in time to exorcise the evil empress who bathed in blood in order to maintain eternal youth. In the end, after covering up this royal scandal, the throne fell to that prince. Of course, judging from Amelia's words, he didn't do it for long. Soon, the Furious Witch discovered all of this when she was visiting her family. In the end, the prince became fertilizer for the witch's garden. Evil was punished, and justice was upheld. It was another standard fairy tale ending. It was a cause for celebration, and a pity for celebration. Congratulations, my ass. No matter how I look at it, it's all your fault, Roland. What? I was innocently attacked once again. I clearly hadn't even heard of this story before. Now that I thought about it, back in the day, I was searching all over the world for clues to my revenge. How could it be my fault as well? If it wasn't for your betrayal causing me to lose trust in men, how could I have set up such a harsh test to test little Lilith's future husband? In the end, the one who passed was such a pervert, causing Lilith to suffer such misfortune in the end. In the end, all of this is your fault. I was instantly rendered speechless. It wasn't that I couldn't retort, it was that I was so angry that I didn't know what to say. You can blame me for all of this? Then I've basically become the root of all evil. And don't blame Lord Roland. It's all Lilith's fault. Huh, I've gotten over it now. Men are ugly and untrustworthy. I only like women now. The me back then was far too foolish. All right then, so the rumors that some people's sexual orientations would change after suffering a major emotional setback were actually true. When Amelia heard her niece's declaration of being a lesbian, she took 2 steps back with a pale face. It would seem that she was far more innocent than she appeared on the surface. But then, I discovered that I had misunderstood. Amelia actually started crying loudly. Wah, pitiful little Nana, it's all your aunt's fault. Even if that bastard is already dead, your aunt will definitely help you find that bastard's undead teacher. Wah, it's all that bastard's fault. He said something like, don't care about what others think, work hard to pursue true love, and if your lover doesn't meet your standards, you could try using your own methods to change her and accept her. That irresponsible undead mage who spouted nonsense is the true culprit. When I heard this angry roar, the snacks in my hand instantly fell to the ground. Why did these words sound so modern? Why do they sound so familiar? They were exactly the same as a chicken soup for the soul novel that I had read in another world. Could it be that such things were popular in this world as well? Prince? Back then, in order to collect information for my revenge, I did indeed take in several powerful disciples. One of them was Swanna's father. I think he was also from Psalm. Could it be? Roland told me this before. He was the one who encouraged me to follow my heart and pursue true love. That was how I finally made the decision to abandon my prejudices and work hard to pursue my new happiness. Could it be that these words have already been spread? It's a famous quote. Lilith had a stunned expression, but Amelia lowered her head and muttered something. I knew it, only then she suddenly turned around and smiled at me. Huh, it's indeed a famous quote, but it'll soon become the crazy words of a dead man. As expected, only you can become the culprit. Her blood-red eyes were the bright red of a wild beast, and her green hair was growing furiously. Her killing intent and anger were already exploding, and even the ground was trembling under her frightening brute force. I knew it. Those seemingly reasonable chicken soup for the soul are all so unreliable. Trying to enlighten others like that will most likely cause problems. Ah, Amelia, don't hit my face. I still have a meeting to attend. Chapter 199. The Mist Alliance was a new faction that would rise up. However, there were some things that needed to be decided beforehand. Strategic planning, or perhaps I should call it a general division of the regions. If these couldn't be decided quickly, there would likely be endless disputes in the future. The first thing that needed to be decided was the location of the headquarters. Or perhaps I should call it the location of the capital. There were a few suitable locations. Definder and Antun were both excellent candidates. Definder was the god of Law Womian's holy land, the Sinless City. It was also quite suitable for displaying the god of Law's special traits, so it would be fine to be the new capital. At the very least, with Definder as the capital, I wouldn't have to worry about the public support in defending the city. Try attacking the god of Law's holy land. Law job class members that are several times stronger than usual are waiting for you. Perhaps Womians will personally descend to the mortal world to deal with you. Definder, the capital that would never fall again, was indeed quite attractive, especially for me personally. I also hoped that Definder would be able to swiftly rebuild with the resources of the entire Mist Alliance, so that the Northland's former capital could be restored to its former glory. However, it was obvious that Definder wasn't the best choice. As for the latter, Antun was the largest city in the entire Northlands. Its businesses and industries were all quite developed, and due to a certain person's surrender, this city had been preserved relatively well from the flames of war. As long as some resources and funds were invested, it would be possible to make it flourish again. As Antun's political status rose, its well-established trade routes would be of great use. Plus, the Mist Alliance also had tax-free trade routes, so it was only a matter of time before it became a major commercial city. Even though both cities had many advantages, in the end, I still helplessly gave up on choosing the two countries' capitals as the headquarters, choosing Red Maple City instead. Yep, it was this ruined city that had already been reduced to rubble. This was originally only a second-tier city in the Sluir Kingdom. Its most famous landmark was its War History Museum. After this battle, the museum would probably have many more collections to add to its collection. After more than 2 months of war, including cruel street battles and even a god's descent, it would be an exaggeration to say that this place was in ruins. If this was the capital, it would be no different from peacefully building a city. But in the end, I still chose it. The reason? Only this place was suitable. Although the Mist Alliance would definitely have the people of the Mist at its core, it would ultimately become an alliance of many different species and countries. If the Mist Alliance chose Antun or Definder, which meant that choosing Donlon or Sluir as their capital will be far too obvious in terms of politics. The result of this would be that the other allied countries would definitely be wary of us in the future, and it would also be detrimental to the equality between the people of the Mist and the other species. That was why I could only give up on these two seemingly perfect options. Politically speaking, choosing this battlefield where the various species and countries of the Northlands had allied together to fight against the invaders would make it the future capital of the Mist Alliance. At the very least, this would give the participating soldiers a natural sense of closeness. Perhaps this would even give the participating countries the impression that the Mist Alliance was independent from the other countries, so that they wouldn't retaliate too much. If I could accomplish this, that would be my greatest victory. Of course, since the Sluir Kingdom and the Donlon Principality were the two countries of the people of the Mist as the core, it would be impossible for the Mist Alliance to be completely independent. But at the very least, it would be possible for the Mist Alliance to maintain its reputation. Even if I decided that Red Maple City would be the capital, Intune and Definder wouldn't give up on it. Definder, which was already unlikely to fall, might be relatively remote and barren, but could definitely become a logistics center, a military center, and a technological center. And Red Maple City's special status as a guiltless city would allow it to become the Church of Law's headquarters. It would also be like Sulphur Mountain City in the past, creating a place where different species could coexist together in order to attract even more believers of law. As for the Sluir Kingdom's Antune City, it would be sufficient for it to continue acting as a commercial center. Of course, I still had a series of other plans that I wouldn't discuss here. I could predict that based on current developments, Definder in the south, Red Maple City in the center, and Antune in the north would become the three most important cities in the Mist Alliance's lifeline. In fact, I was even considering setting up a regular airship route between these three cities. At the very least, these three cities would become the people of the Mist's dream home, and the already destroyed Mist Kingdom would begin its revival once more. Of course, while ideals were beautiful, reality was often cruel. My plans had already been calculated for 10 years, but the Red Maple City before me was still nothing but rubble. Today, while Red Maple City was still immersed in the joy of victory, outside of a 3-story building in Red Maple City, there were sentries every few steps. Security was extremely tight. This place used to be a base that Red Maple City had given to the people of Donlon. After that, it was given to Olivia, Timlad, Amelia, and the other technicians to be used as a logistics and research base. Due to the intermittent sounds of explosions and screams of pain, along with the occasional large fire and mushroom cloud, this place became a plague zone in the eyes of most citizens, even during the relatively peaceful post-war period. Nobody dared to approach it. There was a reason why this place was so heavily guarded. There was an incredibly important surgery going on here, and the people involved were all incredibly important. There was no room for any mistakes. But since Amelia was the one performing the surgery, it wasn't wrong to call an experiment. The spacious room was completely empty, and there was not a single sound to be heard. There was no one else in the empty room. Even though this surgery was incredibly difficult, Amelia obviously trusted the Vine assistant that she had personally cultivated more than the rookie assistant who was prone to making mistakes. This was a typical witch's room. There were cursed dolls, scarecrows, live lizards in glass bottles, and strange drawings that reminded people of vicious curses. Of course, there was also a gigantic magic pot that was a witch's trademark. Strange magical runes were drawn on top of the pitch-black pot, and the thick black liquid inside gave off a disgusting stench. Actually, the things floating in the pot were even more disgusting. The silly cat, dark green herbs, strange gems, and living plants that were screaming in pain. It was likely that no one would want to drink a single mouthful of this. And right now, Amelia, who was sharpening her knife, wasn't using her usual tools. Instead, she was using an adamantine saw to cut an unknown green object. It's finally done. Putting down the electric drill and saw, Amelia breathed a sigh of relief. The bloody piece of light green meat was finally cut off. Then, she threw the piece of meat, which was still dripping with green blood, into the pot. In an instant, a green mist gushed out, and the bonsai next to the pot withered instantly. Hey, that's not right. This is obviously poison. Hey, Amelia, just what do you intend to do? Didn't I want you to perform the surgery? Why did you concoct poison? As the person involved in this surgery, my intestines were green with regret. But after I was injected with a large amount of anesthetic and a paralysis spell that was enough to paralyze a winter wolf, I couldn't feel anything below my neck. Thus, even though I saw that something was wrong with Amelia, I couldn't move from my bed and could only shout in regret. As expected, I should have looked for Marguerite. Damn it, where did they sneak off to this time? Hey, Amelia, how could these things have anything to do with the surgery I requested? You can't be thinking of taking revenge on me, right? Looking at the witches giggling foolishly as they stirred in the pot with the saw, I felt more and more suspicious. After all, I had accidentally and severely offended Amelia and Lilith recently. Although I immediately apologized sincerely after the incident, and used a 300-page thesis to prove that the perverted prince's actions had absolutely nothing to do with me. Sometimes when a woman's anger gets to her head, she'll directly go for the results. It would be strange if she could reason with me, but I was still considered lucky. At least I could still move my head after being anesthetized, deprived of consciousness. The other person involved in the surgery was lying beside me, unable to even raise her head. Grim, Glena, was tightly bound by chains. Her fearless eyes were filled with fear, and her tightly bound mouth was making whimpering sounds. Although she was struggling, I knew that she was definitely unable to open the chains. Why would I know? That's because I was the one who tied her up. Cough. Back then, in order to prevent her from running away, I purposely used a special binding technique and an especially sturdy rope. Who knew that we would be in the same boat? Speaking of which, even though it was the binding technique that accentuated her figure, it was still as flat as before. Wah! She seemed to notice my regretful gaze, so her face was filled with anger. But then, she kept blinking at me. Judging from how she was looking down, it seemed that she was trying to guide me to look at something. But with just one glance, I was startled. You want me to look below your waist? Why are you lifting up your skirt? There's a red fuse. You actually put explosives in your skirt? Aren't you afraid of blowing yourself up? As expected of a natural-born explosive maniac. Underneath her long lace skirt, yellow explosives were actually tied to her snow-white thighs. Underneath her entire skirt was a dangerous arsenal. As the queen of a country, Grim was quite ridiculous. She still spent most of her time and energy on her hobby, creating new types of bombs. But obviously, the maids and aides in the royal palace wouldn't allow the queen to play with explosives all day long. She lacked a sense of security and wouldn't listen to anyone's advice. So, she simply hid the explosives in a very obvious location. Naturally, no one dared to touch them. You want me to open the explosives? Blast open the ropes? Grim kept nodding. She was doing her best to lift up her skirt, and her gaze was fixed on the shortest of all the explosives. That was the extremely small amount of gunpowder that could be used right now. 3 datura grass, 2 cursed ghosts, and these precious mushrooms. Hee, they should be delicious. I gritted my teeth as I looked at the witches who were happily stirring a large pot of medicinal soup. That rainbow-colored mushroom was obviously a super poisonous substance. Judging from what she was saying, Amelia was clearly delirious. She's completely unreasonable when she's crazy. Let's go all out. And so, I could only use my chin to support myself as I slowly moved my head under Grim's skirt. Why did I sound so perverted? Fine, I should rephrase it. I was doing my best to move my mouth toward a certain location on the little girl's thighs. Fine. That was even more perverted. I might as well not say anything. When my white thighs appeared in front of me, I felt dizzy. I felt like a brand new dark history was about to appear. But at this point, it wasn't the time to hesitate. If someone discovered that my head was under her skirt, and news of my action of licking her thighs spread, my reputation would be completely ruined. Roland, what are you doing? I paused in surprise when I heard this. Wasn't this Eliza's voice? I then stuck my head out, and, as expected, the person who greeted me was my furious demon girlfriend. I was worried that something had happened to you. I've always wondered why you suddenly took in an adopted daughter. So it was because you wanted to play as an Anababa. Asterisk boom. Asterisk fine, this time, I wasn't beaten up by someone else. Since Eliza was here, at least my life was saved. However, my current appearance was far too embarrassing. I didn't know how to explain it. So I simply knocked my head against the wall and fainted. When I woke up from my deep sleep in a daze, I heard Eliza and Amelia's conversation. You're saying that I'm creating a magic potion? Look, this is my self-created magic potion cooking technique. See, isn't this quite convenient? There's no need for messy steps. All you need to do is add the ingredients, cook it, and you can eat it. This surgery will take at least 10 hours, and there's no way to stop it in the middle. I need to prepare dinner and supper first. What's that green thing? It looks so disgusting. Green dragon meat. Although it's a little tough, it's still delicious. Is it delicious? It's super delicious. All you need to do is cook it, and the deliciousness will overflow. How about you give it a try? Detect poison. I mercilessly cast a spell that detected poison. Unsurprisingly, I saw a pitch-black glow that represented poison. I'm sorry. I forgot that you probably can't eat poison. For me, food is something I'm used to enjoying. The more poisonous the ingredients, the more delicious they are. Hee, I'm able to survive just by photosynthesizing, so it's impossible for poison to enter my bloodstream. This soup is good for nourishing my skin, but I forgot that you're still a fragile creature and almost poisoned you to death. I'm so sorry. Although she said she was sorry, judging from Amelia's expression, it was obvious that her apology wasn't sincere at all. However, Eliza wasn't willing to be outdone. She took the pitch-black soup in one gulp and drank it all in one gulp. It's so disgusting. With such cooking skills, I think I understand why you've never been able to get married. Disgusting? You dare to insult my cooking skills. It's clearly nutritious and delicious. There must be something wrong with your sense of taste. Why don't we find a third party to evaluate it and see how it tastes? For example, that bastard Lulicon who just stuck his head under a little girl's skirt. That pervert who's clearly awake but still pretending to be asleep and eavesdropping. And that bastard pervert who just took an adopted daughter and then secretly turned into a ghost father. If looks could kill, I would have already been cut into pieces. Judging from Amelia's eager expression, it was highly likely that she would be forced to drink this nourishing soup. I didn't have the ability to be immune to poison like these two. Although I probably wouldn't die in the end, who wouldn't be able to take a stomach wash for no reason? Asterisk clack. Asterisk, and so I unhesitatingly slammed into her. This time, I didn't hold back at all. At the very least, I definitely didn't intend to wake up before the surgery was completed. Why don't you become my adopted daughter in the future? I was used to planning before taking action, so how could I possibly say something so casual? Actually, there really was a reason why I took in Grimm as my adopted daughter. We definitely can't allow Galena and Renee to become Cavendish's vessels again. Any information leaking from them must be stopped immediately. Although Cavendish helped us this time, it was mainly because he wanted to punish Rose for crossing the line. I really didn't have the slightest confidence that he would stand on the other side next time. And the two descendants of the Mist were obviously incredibly important. If they were dragged into the demon abyss, it would definitely result in irreparable losses. Obviously, the most important thing was to quickly deal with the problem of the demonkin in their bodies. Otherwise, if my information kept leaking, whether or not my plan would succeed would probably depend on Cavendish's mood. Powerful demons treat their direct bloodline as their personal property. From a certain standpoint, it's not wrong. The summoning of the bloodline is impossible to resist, and there's a huge difference between Cavendish and Renee, which makes any method of resistance useless. But it's not completely impossible. There were quite a few demonkin in this world, and the mage's research on them was quite mature. There really was a trick that could remove the ancestral demon's control over their descendants. For the demonkin, the reins are tied to their souls. Unless they die, it's impossible to remove them. And if they really die, their souls will most likely be dragged down to hell by the reins. But we can change the person holding the reins. As long as their powers come from the same source, we can think of a way to cover them up. For example, if there's a descendant of the Inferno demons, we can inject a demon lord's bloodline into the descendant and use a blood exchange method to turn the descendant into a double demonkin. Then, the stronger demon lord's bloodline will naturally be able to suppress the Inferno demon's bloodline, which is equivalent to removing the Inferno demon's control over the descendant. And after that, as long as we get rid of the demon lord, we will have nothing to worry about. I had to admit that this was quite a genius idea. It perfectly utilized the demonization ability of the demon lord's bloodline and the law of the jungle. But here, I'm met with a small problem. I have no way of finding a demon with a higher rank than Cavendish. He's an Abyss Prince. Theoretically speaking, only the Chaos Abyss itself has a higher rank than him. Even if we find a demon stronger than him, it probably won't be of any use. Besides, we won't be able to deal with a demon stronger than him. But from a certain standpoint, we still found a solution that wasn't really a solution. Since we can't force the main rains to change directions, then let's try to see if we can redirect them to a tributary. My soul wavelengths were incredibly similar to Cavendish's. If I transformed into a demon, my demonic blood should be of the same origin as his. Actually, if we only looked at the power level, my original Sin Demon God form wouldn't be any weaker than the Chaos Abyss Prince's. Since my demonic blood was of the same origin, it was even possible for the rains to mistake me for its master. And once it locked onto me, I naturally wouldn't let go. Then, I would change my bloodline. Perhaps I would be able to cut off my connection with Cavendish. This sounded quite complicated, and there were many theoretical problems, but it was actually quite simple to do. All I needed to do was activate my original Sin Demon God form and transform into a demon of the Chaos faction. Then I would transfuse my blood. If everything went smoothly, I would be able to turn Galena from Cavendish's descendant into Roland's descendant through a special magical ritual. Of course, since they were twins, there was actually no difference at all on a genetic level. From a certain standpoint, since my blood flowed through her veins, she would indeed become a blood-related relative of mine. This was also the main reason why I suggested for Galena to become my adopted daughter in order to discard all my other worries. At this moment, I couldn't help but smile as I looked at Galena, who was sleeping soundly next to me. I mysteriously obtained a descendant. Is this what it feels like to have a family? Wait a moment, this isn't right. Why am I so happy? I'm clearly still a single man, yet I mysteriously obtained a blood-related daughter as well as a bunch of naughty children. Asterisk smack. Asterisk suddenly, a bottle landed next to my ear. The black, sticky liquid inside was so familiar. Wasn't this the beauty soup from earlier? Amelia worked hard to make it. Please don't waste it. Drink it while it's hot. Asterisk smack smack. Asterisk there was nothing else behind me. This time, I was stopped before I could even touch her. It would seem that it would be quite difficult for me to repeat the same trick for the third time. The cook Amelia's face was now black from the smoke, but she still had a smile on her face, as if she was quite proud of herself. Don't be in such a hurry. Drink it slowly. There's still a lot in the pot. Does it taste good? This dragon tiger-flavored thick soup was specially prepared for you. Countless bubbles appeared on the cauldron. The twisted skull that suddenly floated to the surface of the water, together with the pitch-black liquid in front of me, made me feel incredibly disgusted. Master, the stomach lavage equipment has been prepared. There's no need for Lady Amelia to wait for long. Relax, after you die, I'll go to the river Styx and ask for your opinion. You're already assuming that I'll die? How unfortunate. Chapter 200. I've been single for half my life, and now I finally have a daughter to take care of. What a pity, what a joyous occasion. Asterisk boom. Asterisk asterisk boom. Asterisk I really wanted to say that, but if the background was a sea of flames and I could hear explosions, then I might as well forget about it. It's a pity, but congratulate my sister. Isn't this girl getting too excited? Should I say that Cavendish and I were worthy of being twins? Our bloodlines didn't clash at all, and under Amelia's guidance, the blood exchange went quite smoothly. There were no adverse reactions that I had expected. There weren't even any allergic reactions or reactions that would normally occur with a normal blood transfusion. Currently, a third of Grimm's bloodline had already been infused with my bloodline. And when I faintly sensed that mystical bloodline connection, I used my will to cancel the demonization and give Galena her freedom. Galena, who had been demonized for so many years, finally took off her blindfold and walked out of her binding armor without any qualms. Of course, it was impossible for a tumor that had already worsened to disappear naturally. Under the current conditions, it was impossible for the demonized portion to disappear. However, this girl with different colored eyes wasn't someone who cared about others' gazes. As long as her demonic eyes weren't shining with that dim yellow evil light from the chaos abyss that constantly dragged her soul into chaos, she was quite willing to take off her blindfold and show off her youthful vigor under the sunlight. You're just too energetic. I only told you to clean up the rubble, not to level it. A new city, a new street, and a new plan. Since I intended to create a megacity, then the rubble left behind by the battle would have to be cleaned up. Originally, I had intended to be an expert in construction and slowly clean up the rubble, but Galena, who still didn't want to return to Antoon, volunteered to give this task to her. Considering that this would save me some money, I naturally didn't refuse. Considering her past history, I had expected that she would go overboard. But since the rubble was already in ruins, going overboard would be fine. This would also allow her to vent some of the energy that she had recently gone overboard. However, it was evident that I had still underestimated her. The old mechanical parts on the battlefield became raw materials. With her status as the Queen of Sluir, the remaining energy furnaces of the abandoned Titan giants were used as raw materials. One by one, the powerful fixed-point bombs were built, forming a tight, explosive network. Then boom, I pressed the red button for detonation, and half of the city was sent flying into the sky. The tremendous explosion destroyed all the glass windows. The demolition that would have taken 2 months was completed in a single day. From a certain standpoint, I had once again underestimated Grimm's fanaticism towards explosions. All right, I'll admit defeat. At least it's better to find trouble with the building than with me. From a certain standpoint, this ritual was the equivalent of establishing the strongest blood relationship possible. I didn't know how to deal with this new adopted daughter that suddenly appeared. It was likely that Grimm didn't know how to deal with his new father either. Previously, Antoon would occasionally call me adopted father, or something like that, and most of it was just a joke. But now, she didn't say anything at all. It was likely that she didn't even know what to call me. Perhaps your way of expressing your feelings is rather unique. Even if you can't normally hug me or act spoiled, don't you think using an exploding alarm clock to wake me up is a bit too much? Waking up every day is a race against my life. If I'm any slower, I'll die, you bastard. By the way, I should mention that after that incident, I received my system's belated blessing as usual. A daughter who isn't related to you by blood calls you father, and you're still an old virgin. You meet all the requirements. Congratulations on obtaining the achievement being a happy father and the honorary title King of Spare Tires. After equipping this title, it will be easier for you to obtain sympathy from women and friendship from men. This was actually quite pitiful, but as always, my system added insult to injury at lightning speed. Actually, you can consider going one step further. Gather 7 daughters who aren't related to you by blood and still maintain their virginity. Then, you can complete the task of raising beautiful girls. Depending on how well you complete this task, you can obtain the 3 epic achievements of being a happy father-lover, legendary king of fathers, and veteran nanny father. Finally, you can obtain the epic title of You're the Ultimate Good Man. This will greatly increase your friendship with women, and also greatly increase the difficulty of obtaining love. Of course, if you plan on going down the path of being a demon, don't hesitate. I still have the Onababa series of titles that I guarantee will be powerful enough. Wah, I'm not the king of spare tires. I don't want to be a father god. At that time, even I, who had long since become numb to the fact that my system had been scammed for so many years, could only helplessly lie on the ground with tears in my eyes. The system added insult to injury. Actually, you've basically completed this achievement. Renee, Glena, Eliza, and not to mention that it's impossible for your physical body to reach adulthood in the short term. Stop struggling. You can't resist fate. Looking at it from a different perspective, being a legend father god is actually quite awesome. At least. Fine, the system can't find anything good about it, so I'll just directly express my sympathy and condolences to you. So many naughty children. Father God, you've worked hard. Where should I start commenting from? Should I start from when even the damned system admitted that it was intentionally adding insult to injury? Or should I start from when I became a legend father? Or should I start from when the system was so pitiful that it couldn't bear to continue commenting and instead turned around to express sympathy? By the way, I also received another achievement on that day. You voluntarily ate highly poisonous food and didn't die. Congratulations to the host for obtaining the achievement. Hungry, don't care what you eat. After equipping this achievement, your appetite will be doubled, and your resistance to poison and disgusting food will be slightly increased. This series of achievements also includes Food God. Nothing taboo, will eat anything with 4 legs apart from chairs. Stargazing is so delicious, and so on. After completing all of these, you will receive the epic achievement, the man who stands at the top of the food chain, and the legend title Bay, Devourer of the Void. Actually, with Amelia here, you could have easily achieved this. Keep up the good work. Haha. After eating those things, I really did see the river Styx. Those bastards even said to me, "You're here again? How long do you intend to stay here for?" The next time I eat those things, I'll really be staying here forever. Fine then, let's forget about the past. Right now, the most important thing was to find someone to take revenge on. You're such a scammer. When half of the entire city went up into the sky, as the person in charge of this project, I finally managed to get rid of all the complaints and documents and deal with a large number of accidents caused by being frightened. I angrily went to find Glenna to take revenge, but the result was that before I could even complain to her face, I discovered an unexpected battle. In an empty area, Renee and Glenna were currently fighting. Sword energy was everywhere, and explosions were everywhere. Judging from the power of the battle, it was obvious that both of them were serious. Unlike before, the Demon Prince's bestowment was no simple one. The highest quality chaos transformation gave Renee far too much power. Cavendish was worried that his descended body would mysteriously die, so he directly gave Renee a large amount of combat experience that came from her instincts. Her bug-like soul imprint also gave her a comprehensive increase in power. The current Renee was one of the top, even among veteran legend rank individuals. Although she was still unable to release sword energy, Roland's sacred sword sliced through the air like a silver dragon. Every time she attacked, she would have the power to collapse the heavens. Her sword pressure and aura were like an ever-increasing gravity that suppressed her opponent's ability to move. Actually, as the battle progressed, her seal of infinite courage was being activated. Her power level was indeed increasing. After the bloody battle on that snowy night, the current Night Princess seemed to have finally obtained the Sacred Sword's recognition. She's even formed her own combat style. It seems that she won't be far from becoming completely independent. I had personally taught Renee. Although Cavendish had interfered, her growth was still within expectations. However, I was completely unable to understand Glenna. What astonished me the most was that although it seemed like Renee was in control of the battle with her sacred sword, and Glenna had less and less space to dodge, she was actually the one in control of the battle's tempo. Although Glenna was petite and nimble without her heavy armor, she was still born with tremendous strength. She wielded a weapon in each hand. Her halberd moved like the wind, while her sword moved like lightning. They didn't interfere with each other and worked together as if they were two weapon masters working together. She's still only at the gold rank, but suddenly, Glenna's skirt slid down, and a round goblin grenade dropped down. The lit fuse was about to run out. Renee paused in surprise for a moment before hurriedly jumping back. However, the fuse had run out, and nothing happened. Asterisk boom. Asterisk the gunpowder from Glenna's grenade palm dissipated along with the smoke. After putting some distance between them, Glenna unhesitatingly tossed away her heavy melee weapons. Now, it was time for her to use firepower. She would toss out all her muskets and explosives. I suddenly discovered that although Glenna was stuck at the gold rank, she was definitely no ordinary gold rank. She had reached the master gold level in both long and short weapons. She was also a master in engineering, and her overall strength far surpassed that of a legend. She also had excellent piloting skills. She was a rare all-rounder. The most important part was that she had plenty of combat experience. In front of the experienced Glenna, Renee was still nothing more than a rookie. Glenna completely predicted Renee's movements and attacked first, suppressing her at every turn. Renee's attacks were relatively simple and direct, while Glenna's attacks were numerous and didn't need to be repeated. Once one side figured out the other's trump cards, Glenna began to use her full strength, and the battle began to turn around. Under normal circumstances, Glenna would definitely win, but Renee has that. In the end, Renee will definitely win. As expected, Renee seemed to notice that I had arrived. Perhaps it was because she was unable to accept the pressure, but in the end, she still raised her sacred sword. Return, kings. All right, there was no need to say anything else. The kings of Valkyrie descended, and Galena was instantly sent flying by 3 sword energies. The battle was over. Renee had won, and Galena was left to sulk. That's right, 3 sword energies instead of 1. After that battle, Roland's sacred sword completed its transformation into a god equipment. There weren't many other changes, but the limit of summoning 3 kings of Valkyrie per day had been changed. You can summon 4 Valkyrie per day, at most 3 at a time. If you go all out and summon 12 kings of Valkyrie at once, you're such a scoundrel. Renee dispelled Valkyrie, while Galena ran over to my side. Before I could even complain, she reached out her hand. It's mine. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It turned out that Galena was quite displeased that she lost. She felt that it was unfair of me to give the sacred sword to Renee, so she was trying to make up for it. You can only blame your weapon if you can't win. How impatient. In that case, Renee, throw down your sacred sword and we'll fight again. Why wouldn't I use the god equipment I have? If you're displeased, go ask Roland for his god equipment. As she said that, she began to laugh. God equipment was something that could only be found by luck. Even she didn't believe that Roland had any more. I do have some, and I was just about to give it to you. As I said such inconceivable words, I stuffed a black dagger into Galena's hands. I'll give this god equipment to protect you, but you definitely can't let anyone know about it, and you definitely can't use it to harm your friends. Otherwise, you'll regret it. Felix's remorse. Dagger. God equipment. Attack power 1 to 3. Choose one of the following 4 special effects for each attack. The dagger's blade will be infused with the corresponding light. Divine Right. Nature's End. Anyone struck by this dagger will be infused with aging poison. No matter if it's a living creature or a plant. Even if it's a rock, it will reach the end of its lifespan and advance green light. Divine Right. Life Distortion. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with a strange hormone, causing them to mutate for a short period of time, changing their form and species. There's a 10% chance that it will be a beneficial mutation, causing them to become even stronger. There's a 30% chance that it will be a harmful mutation, causing them to become weaker. The rest is an insignificant mutation. Red Light. Divine Right. Poison God's Hatred. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with an incurable mixture of poisons, causing them to fall into eternal slumber, black light. Divine Right. Felix's Redemption. When this effect is activated, the target will be infused with an antidote. All 3 of the above effects will be dispelled. However, the prerequisite for this is that the first 3 effects must be activated. There's a line of yellow words on the back of the dagger. My dagger is covered in fatal poison. Lick, it's poisonous. This was an ordinary-looking black iron dagger. It was so simple and unadorned that even a novice thief wouldn't be interested in it. However, it was indeed a god equipment. Felix, who had devoured the forest guardian god's divine power, had immediately died as soon as he ascended to the divine throne. The divine power he left behind had been transformed by the system into this poisonous dagger, which was also the greatest spoil of victory in this divine war. I had done experiments before. When the green light's natural end effect was activated, plants would instantly die, while animals would become middle-aged with 1 slash, old with 2 slashes, and die of old age with 3 slashes. The red light's mutation was even worse. There was a normal chance of a mutation occurring, which was a complete mutation of a species. I personally witnessed a mutated white rabbit swallow a wild boar in 1 gulp. The black light, which was the most fatal of all, was simple. 1 slash, and the target would fall into eternal slumber. As for the only antidote, White Redemption, it required at least 3 sacrifices in order to be used. It required at least 3 lives to save 1 person. As expected of a god equipment, but what's the meaning of this attack power that's even weaker than a fruit knife's? In order to inject poison into the dagger, it should at least break the skin. How can such a blunt knife cut through my defense? I lightly sliced my arm with this dagger, but I didn't feel anything at all. My Titan body was directly immune to this bit of damage. And if I didn't see any blood, this god equipment dagger would be no different from a fruit knife. Normally speaking, powerful semi-god equipment and god equipment would all have very troublesome side effects. Perhaps this blunt knife itself was a type of limitation, which was why this god equipment had such a troublesome god equipment curse attached to it. However, its sharpness, which couldn't even pierce through leather armor, limited its usage. There's no need to think about direct combat, but it's a good item for sneak attacks. If it's Galena, she should be able to use it to its fullest potential. Galena kept nodding her head after obtaining the god equipment dagger. Her icy little face finally started to smile, and that instant pure smile was incredibly cute. She then turned around and started showing off to Renee, as if she had obtained some important victory. However, this wasn't the time to be wasting time. I had more important matters to attend to. Get ready. The disaster relief team has already been assembled. Let's go to the elves together. Chapter 201. There are no victors in war. Unlike those legends and epics, war would only leave behind hatred and ruins, as well as a chain of hatred that would linger until the end of the world. Most normal people wouldn't like war, so why was there still war? Perhaps it was because of personal benefits. As long as there was no effective mechanism to resolve conflicts, plus there were ambitious people manipulating and fanning the flames from behind the scenes, there would be no end to this war. In this war that engulfed the entire Northlands, the Beastmen were fighting for their homeland, while the elves were fighting for their former glory. From their perspective, they weren't doing anything wrong. And looking at history, as the ones who started this war, they were all the losers in previous wars. This war was no different from all previous wars, as they were all fighting for their own species' survival space. However, there are some things that couldn't be determined by right or wrong. No matter what reason they had for starting this war, this land of ice and snow had already been soaked in blood. Countless souls had cursed the gods and the invaders before they died. The relationship between the various races that had just thawed returned to the freezing point in this war. Someone has to pay the price. Settling accounts after the war seemed to have become an inevitable rule. The warmonger who failed would be dragged to the judges' stand to receive an absolutely unfair judgment. At such a time, even the most impartial judge would choose to be blind and sentence the criminal to death several dozen times over as the victims cried and roared in anger. All right, I knew that this was meaningless, but sometimes it was quite satisfying. Not only was this a way for the innocent to rest in peace, it was also a way for the survivors to vent their hatred. The sinners had to be judged, and this was the fastest way for the survivors to eliminate their hatred and return to a peaceful life. But this time, after the war ended, it was time for the usual settling of accounts. However, there was a small problem. In terms of losses, perhaps even Slewweir, which suffered the worst losses, couldn't compare to the country that started this war. Over and over again, the Highland Beastmen lost the blood and flesh that they had accumulated for more than 100 years. It was obvious that they wouldn't be able to recover for a long time after the war. And since the Beastmen had a tradition of leading the charge, most of the Beastmen's leaders had died in this war. Kill those Beastmen bastards. We want revenge. What do you mean children and women are innocent? Didn't those Beastmen kill for them? They can kill our children and women. Why can't we kill theirs? When the joy of surviving by a fluke dissipated, they looked at the devastated world. The survivors clamored to attack the plains, kill all the Beastmen, and completely annihilate the Beastman race. The grievances of the people were very troublesome, especially the grievances of those who had suffered the pain of war. Some things were very difficult to reason with. You could say, don't take the initiative to start a new war, and then talk about the consequences of starting a new war. All they needed to do was say, can't we take revenge? Why are they the only ones who can kill our people? Your efforts will be wasted. Even without the no-war principle, our country wouldn't be able to withstand a new war right now. The beastmen of the plains wouldn't just sit back and watch the humans carry out a massacre out of vengeance, would they? If the Highland beastmen were allowed to do as they pleased, it would be a calamity for future generations. I indeed had a plan to deal with this, but now obviously wasn't the time to start a new conflict. Then find some sinners. It just so happens that there's a bunch of leftovers who are still committing crimes. Let's use them as an example to others. Perhaps it was worth rejoicing that the beastmen didn't die out on that difficult night. Even among the beastmen, not every single one of them was a warrior who didn't fear death. Many tribe leaders didn't bring their tribesmen into that meat grinder-like city of death. Instead, they chose to escape under the cover of night. And when their return journey became incredibly difficult, they naturally became the most dangerous of bandits in order to survive. That was why I sent out all of my Aurora Night warriors to hunt them down when the situation stabilized. And so, even though there weren't that many of them, they became the most dangerous enemies thanks to my propaganda. Camel Baba and the 40 Jackal Bandits, 3 female Tiger Men, and 105 male Beastmen were already on my wanted list. But soon, they would be escorted in prison carts and paraded through the streets of every city. They would enjoy the insults and stones of the survivors. Finally, they would be judged based on their crimes and would most likely be hanged on the gallows. History had already proven that the moment the invaders failed, they would become the most pitiful species in the war. Their territories would be occupied, and revenge would definitely come. Nobody would pity them for their losses in the war, because they deserved it. They were both the victims of the war, as well as the instigators of the war. Apart from these tangible and intangible things, out of consideration for the future, the victors would not give the losers a chance to rise again. All kinds of harsh treaties would inevitably swarm in, and the originally arrogant invaders, as the losers, would have to agree to the harshest conditions in order to survive in the world. And these harsh conditions and humiliating conditions would often lead to conflicts in the future, which would eventually lead to a new round of war. And so, I was especially careful in dealing with the beastmen after the war. Even though I already had a contingency plan, I still invited my advisors to discuss it repeatedly. Under my signal, my advisors spoke up one by one, but they were all useless. Things like restricting trade, cutting off the supply routes, forcing the beastmen to hand over hostages and war reparations, and so on. I was already drowsy from listening to them. Cough. Restricting trade? Even if they wanted to trade, would there still be any merchant caravans traveling between the two sides? It would be strange if they weren't treated as spies and killed. Cutting off the supply routes? Let's first redraw the map that Omdorokan made meaningless. Forcing the beastmen to hand over hostages and reparations? At least do your homework. There are so many beastmen tribes out there, and you want them to hand over hostages and reparations? If you push them too far, it'll be another calamity. But when my advisor named Pileb spoke up, I immediately woke up, startled awake. The ancient chieftain system needs to be abolished. Only a republic can save the world. In order to completely eliminate all conflicts and wars, we need a great revolution to eradicate the ancient and ignorant authoritarian system. My advisor's previous uncreative speech made me want to sleep, but this advisor's speech was quite creative. But to abolish the foundational feudal monarchy system of this world, this advisor was quite daring. More than 70% of the countries in Ike were monarchies. Wasn't he afraid of being burned at the stake for such an extreme? Chop off the heads of those selfish chieftains and create a brand new social system. Allow the foolish beastmen to also create their own efficient new republic. That way, I couldn't help but size up this rather gentle young man. He was so worked up that his spittle flew everywhere, his fists were clenched tightly, and his eyebrows were furrowed. It was as if his body was filled with endless flames of anger. He was quite similar to the legendary revolutionaries in the novels. But for him to say such unrealistic and far-fetched words in a feudal era, I was even beginning to wonder if he was a transmigrator. Then we can ask them for war reparations and hostages. All right then, I take back what I just said. This guy was nothing more than a madman. After all, he was still trying to obtain war reparations and hostages. My apologies, my lord. Pylobs just isn't in a good state at the end. He just suffered a setback in his relationship, got dumped, and had his head smashed by a rock. Recently, he's been a little. My advisor shook his index finger and then pointed at Pylobs' head, indicating that something was wrong. Pylobs then seemed to become even more worked up. His colleagues hurriedly pulled him down, deeply afraid that he would say something even more ridiculous. You rotten remnants of feudalism will never be able to defeat the holy bourgeois warriors. The heads of the foolish kings will fall to the ground one by one, and the great republic will rise. This will be a storm, a great storm that nobody will be able to avoid. You idiots! All right then, Pylob's comrade finally gagged his mouth. He quieted down a little as he was dragged out, but he still fiercely struggled. Shut up. Don't bite me. I'm trying to help you. Don't bite me. Cough. It seems that our advisor is under too much pressure and needs some time to rest. Give him half a year of leave, and if he still hasn't rested enough, give him another half a year. Although I said this, the conference room remained silent. I knew that if this continued, there wouldn't be any results, so I could only toss out my own plan. Didn't Anya say that her tribe also wants to come to the surface? Actually, the Highlands are a good place, at least much better than the pitch-black underground. Let them come. Our participation will only worsen the conflict. The Beastmen have their own rules, and it's best to let the Beastmen deal with the Beastmen themselves. I talked for several hours, but in the end, it was still the same. And after this issue was resolved, the second problem was even more of a headache. Elves? That's really troublesome. If I had to choose the unluckiest side in this battle, the elves would definitely be the best choice. The guardian god had died, and the main armies of the 4 northern kingdoms of the elves had all been annihilated. Although the Tassel Kingdom still had a certain amount of combat strength, all of its royal family members had died, and it was hard to say whether or not their combat strength could even be considered elves. From a certain standpoint, the Tassel Kingdom royal family was one of the main culprits. However, the previous elven king had already perished together with Felix, and punishing the Banshee Swana, who had always been anti-war, would be even more unjustified. And this wasn't even the biggest problem. The biggest problem was the sudden change in the current living environment. The self-sustaining ecosystem that had existed for thousands of years had been broken, and the fatal climate had transformed into the harshest challenge to life. Currently, most of the residents were still fighting for survival. Forget it. Let's not think about this anymore. Let's first focus on providing disaster relief. Otherwise, if everyone dies, talking about anything else will be pointless. The Borealis had already finished its preparations. Once it unloaded the ores obtained from the barbarian tribe, the second rescue team would arrive first. And I was a member of this rescue team. Chapter 202. After twisting the laws of nature for thousands of years, the Northern Elves finally suffered from nature's vengeance. The furious nature used a rapid rain of ice crystals to cleanse this country of sinners, while a dragon-like storm wreaked havoc on the land. The death of the ancient guardians took away the last green of hope. That sounded a little artistic, so let's just get straight to the point. After the natural barrier was broken, the two countries with vastly different climates came into contact with each other. The drastic temperature difference caused the air convection to accelerate and become unstable, forming natural disasters such as hail and tornadoes. The death of the forest guardian god increased the death of the natural vegetation, and the sandstorm also lost its shielding. Multiple natural disasters interacted with each other, causing the situation to become unsalvageable. If we don't do anything, the Northern Elves will probably perish. But I'm not willing to save them for nothing. This was the consensus reached by some human kingdoms. However, their rescue speed was incredibly fast. Or perhaps it should be said that their speed of stealing was incredibly fast. Although the secrets of magic have been passed down by the elves to the other species, as the species with the longest history of magic, many of their magical schools and secret spells were only passed down within the elven species. At the very least, they were ahead of the rest of the world in many aspects, such as inscriptions, foreign languages, and nature mages. The human kingdoms had been coveting them for a long time, and even if it was accidentally leaked, the lucky ones who obtained it would mostly treat it as a secret and keep it for themselves. At the very least, the small kingdoms in the north had no chance of obtaining it. Although the other three northern elven kingdoms had suffered heavy losses, at least their royals were still around. Although their main armies had suffered heavy losses, they still had their own local armies and second-line armies. They were also capable of organizing themselves to save themselves, and were also on guard against the humans. The other kingdoms of the elves were too far away and couldn't save them in time. However, they still existed. Although the elven gods were tempted, they didn't do anything. If they didn't personally come to save them, it would be no different from an invasion. If they went overboard, they would have to consider the chain reactions that would result. In fact, it was the sudden appearance of several dozen elven gods that directly ended the plans of the other kingdoms of the elves. Those elven gods were obviously reinforcements from the other kingdoms of the elves. Not only that, there were divine existences among them, which meant that the elven gods had begun to interfere. That was why Roland's aid to the three countries could only stop at making a fortune out of them. He would use the resources and rations that they lacked to get through the winter in exchange for gold, elven magic tools, and other hard currencies. As for the magical legacies and secrets that they had hidden away, Roland could forget about them. However, Tassel was different. The true god Rose's Fall ritual had displayed her divine power, causing all the elves in this elven kingdom to become fallen elves with dark brown skin. Perhaps even their own species wouldn't recognize them. After all, compared to the surface elves, these gray-blood elves were much closer in appearance and characteristics to their underground cousins, the dark elves. Rose's move was very vicious. Basically, it was equivalent to cutting off the Tassel elves' way of returning to the surface elves. The Tassel elves who had nowhere else to go could only follow her. But when she suddenly fell, it directly caused the Tassel elves to fall into a desperate situation. The other kingdom of the elves hated the Tassel elves for their betrayal, and the humans hated the Tassel elves for starting the war. If the upper echelons of the Tassel kingdom were still around, they would most likely be of some use. But unfortunately, if they were still around, they would probably be directly dragged to the guillotine. Nothing was more convincing than the accusation of the soul of the murdered. When Swana returned, the conspiracy hidden in the gutter was exposed to the public. The original Elven King was treated as an ambitious warmonger, and it was precisely this war that caused the fall of the Guardian Goddess, the extreme deterioration of living conditions, and the plummeting reputation of the royal family and nobles. Not to mention that most of the Tassel elves' descendants had died in this war. The Tassel Kingdom was completely unable to organize any rescue efforts for its own citizens. If it weren't for the fact that the other kingdom of the elves were also suffering from the war, they might have already mobilized their armies for revenge, not to mention rescue. After asking for help from the kingdom of the elves several times, but getting rejected, the Tassel elves could only helplessly ask for help from the neighboring kingdom of Sluir in order to survive. Even though the Tassel elves had just recently been at war, and even though most of the Tassel elves' executioners had died in battle, the blood feud still existed. As a result, the Tassel elves didn't have much hope in asking for help. However, Sluir agreed. Although Queen Glena didn't send any reinforcements out of consideration for her own citizens' feelings, she opened the door to other human countries, allowing them to carry out her rescue mission. As for the rescue teams that came uninvited from various countries, under the call of an alliance, they also began to rescue. Although these rescue teams were quite selfish and were no different from robbers who rob homes while saving people, they did indeed save many gray-blood elves who were on the brink of death. And among these rescue teams, the most eye-catching one was a relatively remote small country, Donlon. Knight Princess Renee, who had become famous in this war, personally led the rescue team. All the believers of the Church of Law were mobilized, and they weren't rescuers like those robbers. Instead, they were truly here to save people. Every time they went to a place, They would distribute resources, search for elves who were suffering from the disaster, set up temporary residences for the refugees, and carry out emergency rescue work according to requests. Repaying evil with good? I don't think you're such a good person. Of course I'm not that foolish. It's just that I'm not as short-sighted as them. What do you think they'll be able to gain from the refugees' gazes as if they were thieves? Our goal wasn't that simple from the very start. Soon, when the refugees began to move, my words were confirmed, and my choice was rewarded. Amidst the endless calamities, the royalty of Donglan lost its authority, and the neighboring countries were eyeing us with hostility, ready to take revenge. The calamities transformed what should have been a livable country into a living hell. No matter whether they admitted it or not, the tassel country was beginning to disintegrate. At this time, while the elven countries closed their doors, many human countries opened their doors to the gray-blood elves who were trying to immigrate here. However, more than 90% of the migrating elves chose to immigrate to Donglan. This great migration would change many things. At the very least, they would bring countless books and knowledge with them. That's right, this was my goal. It wouldn't be meaningful to take advantage of the elves' misfortune, but as long as I could obtain the elves, I would naturally obtain everything. Apart from Donglan's rising reputation, the elf choice was mostly due to the Donglan Principality's excellent reputation. Not only did Donglan not interfere with the elven slave trade, it was also a country that strictly prohibited the practice of slavery. Every other country had elven slaves. In order not to suddenly become someone else's property overnight, coupled with what they had personally witnessed recently, any elf with a normal intelligence would make this choice. Since the situation was developing, I also tried to convince Swana that rather than stubbornly holding on in a neighboring country that was filled with hostility, it would be better for the entire elven species to migrate. Otherwise, even if they survived this winter, what would they do next winter? As long as they were free, it was likely that the petty elven gods would immediately begin dealing with Tassel's betrayal. The three Northlands kingdoms of the elves would be more than happy to act as the vanguard. I didn't think that Galena would be able to completely stop Sluweir's revenge. When a country reached such a state, it was also time for it to end. Go ahead and migrate. In this land, Donglan is probably the only country that hasn't suffered any losses in this war that can truly accept you all. You've all seen the reputation that they've accumulated over the years. Now, they worship the law god as their national religion, and all species have equal civil rights. Even the sinless, undead, can live under the sun. Naturally, you elves can as well. Swana didn't immediately respond to me, but I didn't continue to urge her to make a decision. However, I knew that she would definitely agree in the end. As long as we gathered all the information, if the tassel Greyblood elves didn't want to perish, then the path that I offered would be the best choice. She could only choose the path that I expected. The truth was right in front of her. I indeed had my own selfish motives, but she would still choose the path that I expected because this was the only path to survival. Without a doubt, this was an obvious scheme. It was only a matter of time before Swana agreed. Before that, I would patiently organize a rescue mission to show her sincerity. During this rescue mission, even though the berserk weather made it impossible to use any small airships apart from the Borealis, the Aurora Knight and elite warriors still left a deep impression on the elves. Many elves became famous because of this. Aurora Wings, Angel Wings, gigantic mountain rescue airship, valiant dragon slayer princess, even though she has a strange sexual orientation. Not only did this increase Donglan's reputation, it also gave the elves hope for Donglan. It was likely that as long as Swana made the final decision and called for everyone to migrate, the Great Migration would go quite smoothly. Of course, there were also some things that made me not know whether to laugh or cry. Eternal Friends of the Centaurs? What's that? Oh, that's Lord Beifeng's new title. Didn't the forest centaurs of the Tassel Kingdom lose their homes due to the destruction of a large number of forests? However, those stubborn tribe leaders are unwilling to leave their homes even at the brink of death. They're about to meet a calamity. Lord Beifeng has made his move. I couldn't blame the tribe leaders for being stubborn. As far as I knew, the forest centaurs, and the rainbow deer tribe were all subordinates of the forest god. Perhaps they had signed some sort of contract and were unable to leave. But right now, I was completely distracted by another matter. When did Bayfong become a lord? Judging from his words, it was obvious that this servant was biased. And considering that he was a half-beastman from the Cheryl tribe, it was likely that he had already been killed by Bayfong. So, I turned around and asked another human servant about this. What did he do? Forget about the 18 forbidden ones. I don't want to know anything. I heard that the forest centaurs were planning on waiting for their deaths. So Lord Bayfong and Cassio went to their door and challenged those stubborn tribe leaders based on ancient customs. Not only that, they've been winning every battle thanks to their outstanding strength. As long as they defeat a few more venerable tribe leaders, they'll be able to lead the forest centaurs out of the forest. Oh my, he's doing quite well. I was rather astonished. As far as I knew, Bayfong seemed honest and straightforward, but he actually never did anything that didn't benefit him. I never expected that he would be working so hard to save them. Asterisk pa. Asterisk on a recliner by the side. Eliza suddenly closed a thick cookbook. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a hint. The forest centaur's favorite sport is wrestling. If it's an ancient tradition, most of them would strip naked and wrestle under a small stream or waterfall. Most of the centaur chieftains are strong and muscular men. Roland explained. All right, I was unable to comment on this. After hesitating for a moment, I could only squeeze out a sentence. Well done. What else could I say? No matter what, being able to save the elves and their allies was a good thing that would increase Donlan's reputation. As long as Bayfing's selfish motives weren't exposed, I had no need to stop him. On the contrary, I had to support him. But keep an eye on that bastard. Don't let him do anything crazy. It's already dangerous enough to let Bayfong enter a forest filled with animals. And those centaurs. Ugh. I recalled the look in his eyes when he saw Cassio for the first time. As expected, I should have killed him back then. If he does something scandalous this time. No, he definitely has already done it. I should say, if the scandalous news gets out. The more I thought about it, the more anxious I became. I slammed the table and stood up. No, I have to hurry and stop him. I can't allow him to ruin Donlan's reputation. However, just as I roared righteously, I was stopped. There's no rush. Leave after lunch. Who knows what shocking things he'll do. It'll be too late after lunch. Amelia worked so hard to make lunch. You should at least eat 2 bites. Of course it would be too late. However, it wasn't because the centaurs would be too late. Rather, based on my experience over the past few days, I would have to go to the river Styx again after lunch. If I didn't find an excuse to sneak away now, it would really be too late. No, I probably won't be able to go anywhere after lunch. You can't go anywhere even if you don't eat. I spent a lot of effort to teach Amelia how to cook. I knew that you definitely didn't have good intentions when you taught Amelia how to cook. From the moment you took away that dark, fatal cooking compendium, I predicted that this day would come. Dark, fatal cooking compendium? This isn't a classic British cuisine. Although I don't know what country Britain is, their cooking methods are indeed unique and innovative. Plus, it's easy to learn, so it's really convenient for Amelia to practice. Yeah, it's really simple. There are only 2 ways to cook it. Either you bake it in the oven or you cook in a pot. You don't add any seasoning when cooking, and you just add whatever you like when eating. It's really original. This method is already ridiculous enough, but with Amelia's magic pot, it's already prepared. I spent a lot of effort on today's main dish, so please look forward to it. Suddenly, Amelia's voice came from behind me. I turned around and saw a gigantic fish head facing the sky. Its open mouth was still filled with spittle, and its large, lifeless eyes seemed to be complaining about its pitiful fate. The famous British dish, stargazing. Ugh! At that moment, a strong urge to vomit rose up from my stomach. It would have been fine if it was only the famous British dish, but Amelia added a new understanding to it. Isn't this a demonic fish? It's a super dangerous demonic creature, a highly intelligent creature that's extremely difficult to deal with. Isn't it a special product of the underground river? How did you get it? Yep, it's actually still alive. You actually kill me to cook? I curse you. I curse you. I curse your descendants. Ah. Amelia smiled proudly as she suddenly retracted her fist that had knocked the fish unconscious. Didn't the cookbook say that the most important thing is the original taste of the ingredients? The higher the quality of the ingredients, the better. The demonic fish must taste good. Then, it must be the freshest when it's alive. Yep, delicious. Not only that, Amelia even personally tasted the taste. Ah, it hurts. My cheeks are gone. Don't eat my eyeballs. I actually heard the curse of vegetable that had been cut in half. This strange scene became more and more horrifying, and I didn't know what to say anymore. I could only carefully retreat and try to find a way to escape. However, an even more horrifying conversation came from behind me. That's great. Now we have the ingredients for dinner. Sensei, what are we going to make for dinner? Although I feel much more confident after making this dish, I think it's better to make it simpler. It's even simpler than the British dish. We're going to make a Japanese dish, sashimi. Simpler than directly throwing it into a pot and cooking it. Doesn't that mean we can eat it directly after cutting it up? That's right. That's how the dish is. All right, before the conversation became even more horrifying, I had already escaped. But from this moment onwards, I decided to eat outside until the end. Chapter 203. This was quite effective in providing disaster relief to the Northland's elves. From a certain standpoint, disaster relief was also the best platform for military strength and organization. Unknowingly, the Donglan Principality had already displayed sufficient strength. The Aurora Knight that could fly freely amidst hailstones, the Borealis that could ignore tornadoes, the gigantic engineering machines that could clean up rubble, and the incredibly adaptable 4 elemental swordcasters were all the best examples of the Donglan Principality's strength. They also added to the Donglan Principality's strength to become the future leader of the Mist Alliance. The arrival of another group of reinforcements was something that nobody expected. Their arrival greatly increased the speed of the rescue operation. However, there was a small problem. These reinforcements were residents of the underground, the most evil existences the Holy Church had ever heard of. In a previous battle, Galen had established a certain level of friendship with Swana. This time, when she received a request for reinforcements, she unhesitatingly organized her elite forces. Since the Dark Elves were still going berserk and the underground world wanted to control them, the underground lords were unable to send out their main forces. However, with their frighteningly abundant resources, it was already quite impressive that they only sent out their elite forces. Numerous gold and legend-ranked individuals joined the rescue operation. Not only did this greatly increase the speed of the rescue operation, it also made the other countries in the Northlands fearful of the underground strength. The most eye-catching group, which could be said to be the cornerstone of the rescue operation, was a group of divine knights. They were the Dark Elves. That's right, in the entire world, only Sulphur Mountain City had such a group of Dark Elf Knights. The town security team was sent here to carry out the rescue operation. They were already skilled at guarding cities to begin with, and they had plenty of experience in dealing with all sorts of dangers. Carrying out search and rescue missions in ruins was basically their specialty. The lowest rank among them was the Silver Holy Knight and Law Knight, which made them excellent meat shields to begin with. The heavy enchanted armor that they had just been equipped with was the newest model of the year. As Sulphur Mountain City's only main force, City Lord and unhesitatingly gave them the best equipment. In the past, it was nothing for everyone to have a holy sword. But now that Sulphur Mountain City was rich, they were all equipped with full-body, enchanted mithril heavy armor. Together with all sorts of gadgets created by the engineers, these female knight Galen completely ignored the hailstones and tornadoes. As city enforcement officers who had been working for many years, demolition and relocation were nothing difficult for them. They were used to dealing with disputes and explosions, so they were also good at dealing with ruin rescue missions. And when they discovered the injured, they still maintained a considerable number of holy knights and were able to treat the injured immediately. In a short period of time, their example spread throughout the entire disaster area. They're buried too deep and can't find the injured? 3 high-level holy knights will fill the entire ruins with holy light. Let's save our lives first. She found the injured person behind the wall. She actually tore the wall open with her bare hands and used her body to block the falling rubble. She brought the injured person out unscathed. She's amazing. Sulphur Mountain City's town security was more than enough to take on the role of the royal guards of a mega kingdom on the surface. Their equipment was so extravagant that even legends would be envious of them, and they could directly enter the role of the main character of an epic story. This elite squadron, armed to the teeth, used a rescue mission to display their strength, and it also caused those who were tempted to rein in their ambitions. And so, Sulphur Mountain City's Elf Knight group began to become famous. What? Is it the city's security force? It must just be a cover. How could such a powerful knight group be used for security? And the one that left the deepest impression was that the warriors from Sulphur Mountain City suddenly clashed with Donlan's reinforcements. They even cornered the Church of Law's highest-ranking bishop, Shueti, in a corner and viciously beat him up. Yep. Actually, the core of the Donlan reinforcements was a mercenary organization called the Gentleman Alliance. Just hearing this familiar name caused the town security to go berserk. You bastards, I left you alone for a while, and you actually increased in numbers. But since we're here, today shall be your doomsday. Shueti, you're a criminal. We've finally caught you again. Sisters, take care of them. All right, there were indeed people in the Gentleman Alliance who were difficult to accept, such as that clothes-shredding swordsman, but Lord Shueti was being wronged. Actually, he didn't do much. It was just that the Archbishop was worried about the suffering refugees, so he voluntarily took off his robe and underwear to protect them from a cold. Meanwhile, he only wore his underwear and insisted on providing disaster relief. Even though it was rather indecent, the Archbishop's muscular body had a masculine beauty to it. Plus, he was forced to do so by the circumstances, so no one thought too much about it. But obviously, these misophobic elves were completely unable to accept such behavior. They viewed him as a bad habit that was harmful to society, and that was going a little too far. Who doesn't know that the dark elves are indecent to begin with? Their thoughts must be too dirty, which is why they cause such a huge misunderstanding. In the eyes of biased people, the entire world is tilted. Their hearts are dirty, and they see everyone as dirty. In the end, under the indignation of the soldiers from other countries, Captain Yon of the town security knight could only personally apologize. Fortunately, Lord Shueti was extremely magnanimous and forgave their rashness on the spot. But obviously, Yon and the others didn't appreciate it. We actually had to lower our heads and apologize to that pervert. This is the worst experience in history. No, this is the second time. The first time was when that pervert actually became our superior, Yon. But not even 2 days later, they committed another crime. Not only did they chase the legendary hunter Bayphone with the friends of the centaurs like a rabbit, they even ganged up on this kind and honest person in front of everyone. In the eyes of the world, if Shueti's incident was pardonable, then the Draken Bayphone who was ganged up and beaten up the moment they met was too much of an injustice. Do we need a reason to beat up Bayphone? Then, let's punish him for the crime of Bayphone. Perhaps such a reason would work in Sulphur Mountain City, but in the eyes of other observers, it seemed like they were taking advantage of their position to bully others. Did you hear that? Crime of Bayphone. Crime of Bayphone? He clearly didn't do anything at all. Isn't this too much? You're going too far. Justice is in the hearts of the people. Perhaps the elven ladies still have some prejudice against me, Bayphone. I can understand that, but perhaps they're under too much pressure. If beating me up can relieve their anger and dispel their prejudice, then come. Bayphone. Harald's magnanimity only served to accentuate the elf knight's craziness and incomprehensibility. Listen to their resolution. They're practically saints. Sulphur Mountain City's town security knight squad. Perhaps they have astonishing strength, but their magnanimity and character. They don't even have the slightest bit of Lord Shueti or Bayfing's. Tui. All right, from a certain standpoint, it was just that the past that happened in Sulphur Mountain City was replaying itself. This time, the Gentleman Alliance had successfully toyed with the town security, albeit at a price. Of course, if I appeared, I could indeed dispel these misunderstandings, but I would have to explain what happened underground and the truth behind Bayfoam and Shiwedi. After hesitating for a second, I made up my mind. After all, it wasn't the first time that the town's security had been toyed with by the Gentleman Alliance. I should leave some face for the Church of Law and the Surface Gentleman Alliance mercenary squad. But soon, I didn't have the leisure to care about such small matters. Thanks to the underground autarch and sincere persuasion, Swana also made up her mind to migrate her entire tribe. Their destination was Donglon, a vast but sparsely populated area. Sincere persuasion? And actually knows how to do this? Isn't she supposed to be a weakling with words? Just like Adam, she only knows how to use her fists to persuade others. What? You're finally enlightened. Just treat it as if it's true. Swana and the others are just finding a way out of this embarrassing situation. Let's leave some face for them. Actually, and had only casually mentioned, it seems that this place is uninhabitable. Why don't you go to the underground together with them? If you don't want to go, Donglon and Big Brother Roland would be fine as well. Obviously, such a casual invitation lacked sincerity. And what truly made Swana decide to gamble the fate of her entire tribe on the line wasn't something as abstract as sincerity. It seems that they feel that this ship is reliable enough, so they intend to board it. After sitting in this position, even Swana would have to abandon her personal feelings and place the interests of her tribe above all else. Right now, it was obvious that Swana had offended far too many people. Even if they managed to survive this crisis, it was inevitable that others would hit them while they were down. And since their species had changed, the elven gods couldn't count on them anymore. They needed to find a faction to rely on in order to continue surviving. Although they had long since decided that they needed to rely on another faction, the most important thing was to choose the right target. Otherwise, if the ship sank again, there would truly be no hope for them. If the other human kingdoms were able to display outstanding strength, perhaps the elves would have made other choices in the end. However, in this war and the disaster relief that followed, East Mist was undeniably the main character. Displaying strength and foundation was one thing, but the countless connections they had with the underground world, the new guiltless faction, the Church of Law, and so on were another important bargaining chips. The most important thing was the Mist Alliance's growing momentum of development and new technology, as well as the Mist Alliance project that was destined to sweep through the entire Northlands in the future. For a politician who prioritized the interests of his own people, it was quite obvious what choice he should make. All that was left was internal wrangling, and he would finally come up with a compromise that everyone could accept. Actually, Swana herself had put in a great deal of effort to make the elves, who had no sense of time and loved to endlessly argue, come to a decision so quickly. From a certain standpoint, she had her own thoughts as well. I'm an elf, or an undead. Even though I'm clearly dead, I've become the living support. Perhaps Donglon, where only the guiltless exist, is the only home I can live in. I'm already tired. As long as my tribe can survive, I, the dead, need to find a place to rest. Due to that dishonorable incident that ignited the war, when the conspiracy was exposed, the Council of Elders, which originally had the highest authority in the world, suffered a calamity. The Elven King's accomplices, the elders behind the scenes, were all removed from their pedestals by the angry citizens. It was already quite fortunate that they were able to survive. Ironically, at the cost of her own death, Swana achieved what her father had dreamed of and fought for half his life: complete control over the Tassel Kingdom. However, it was likely that the Tassel Kingdom would cease to exist in the near future. After the Great Migration, even the most optimistic of the Tassel Kingdom's Greyblood elves knew that no matter how kind Donglon was, it would be impossible for them to become part of China. If they stayed here for a short period of time, they could still form a relatively independent region. But if they stayed here for a long period of time, or even forever, the only choice would be to be scattered and assimilate into the local population. Not only would this be a good thing for Donglon, it would also be a good thing for the Greyblood elves. And when all of this happened, the Tassel Kingdom, which had existed for more than 1,000 years, would come to an end. All that would remain would be a new species of the Donglon Principality, the Donglon Greyblood Elves. When a long elven migration procession set off, the elves would look back every few steps with expressions of reluctance, as if they were praying for a miracle to suddenly appear, for natural disasters to suddenly disappear, for the dark clouds of war to suddenly disperse. But at this moment, that familiar song rang out once again. De JD Kasu Odd as the distant relatives, where have you gone? We miss you in our homeland. The Banshee princess, who had turned into a specter, sang that familiar traveler's song once again. Back then, when the dark clouds of war covered her homeland, Liosu had hummed this little song in order to find a place for her people to live and reproduce in. She had left her homeland to search for her ideal country by herself. FRE Cat, are the ancient trees at home still green? That familiar spring scenery of a lake always reminds me of my childhood. Back then, the sky was so blue. Perhaps this was how Liosu had smiled back then as she bid farewell to her family in her homeland. My beautiful childhood has passed, and the nightmarish war is right before me. But I, little Liosu who loves singing the most, believe that there's a peaceful and beautiful land on the other side of the mountain. Yep, perhaps there isn't such a place on the other side of the mountain, but there's definitely such a place on the other side of the mountain. This feeling was so similar to back then. Even though it was clearly a cheerful song, some of the young elves were already beginning to cry in a low voice, while even more of them were beginning to sing together in a low voice. Finally, the many low voices combined into a chorus that echoed throughout this boundless world. My dear Aunt Susan, I miss you again. But, little Yosu, you still can't go home. I still haven't found the home of my dreams, but I believe that the clover will always hide under the hooves of a horse. The home of my dreams is right under my nose. Her singing had already started to spread. Liosu, who had never been discouraged, walked briskly in that chaotic world. She crossed a mountain, a sea, and arrived at the other side of the mountain, and there, and there, and there, and there, and finally, I found it. It's right there. The ancient trees in my dreams are guiding me. I'm about to see the beautiful home of my dreams. That's right. She had found it. The hesitation and depression in the song had disappeared, and the cheerful song had reached its climax. JD ad, Dal Dada 80. My family, I've finally found the home of my dreams. Our new home is in the north. Our new home is in the north. Chapter 204. A battlefield for traitors, a war without justice. No matter how future generations would evaluate this war, this long war that lasted from autumn to winter in the year of the Griffin was destined to be recorded in history. This was the grand opening of a new holy war that had already begun countless times. Its influence would last for decades, centuries, or even millennia. The Elven God's plan had met with an iron wall right from the start. The Beastmen's southern invasion would probably have to wait for the next time. Yet, due to a certain person's scheme, the Beastmen took advantage of the fact that the Beastmen were weak to send visitors from the underground to both sides. After the calamity ended, the underground city lords would establish several dozen satellite cities in the Mist Alliance. These would become the underground faction's bases on the surface. Naturally, there would be no lack of dark elves among them. No matter if they were willing or not, they would become a buffer zone between the Sluir Kingdom and the Elven Kingdoms. Of course, Since and Anya and Little Red all represented their factions and applied to join the Mist Alliance. It could be said that the Mist Alliance was finally established, and this place would become a new outpost. As for the harsh natural environment, to be honest, the underground was about the same. As long as they made proper preparations and had the support of the entire new Mist Alliance, the residents of the underground were confident that they would be able to take root in this land of ice. For the sake of the tassel elves who might return to their homeland, I also had them prepare a sufficiently large piece of land as well as the tassel capital, Tassel City, so that they would have a place to return to their homeland. Of course, if my plan was successful, the elves who had a good life in Donglon wouldn't return to their homeland, which was still a world of ice and snow. As for the Highlands, it seemed troublesome, but due to the heavy losses the Beastmen suffered in the Beastmen's ancient tradition, it actually became much simpler. When a tribe suffers heavy losses, it will merge with a stronger tribe or be swallowed up by the stronger tribe in order to continue the entire tribe. The Highland Beastmen, who had suffered heavy losses to the point where every family wore mourning clothes, faced the powerful underground beastmen. It was impossible to stop the underground beastmen's mass migration. No, it should be said that the remaining tribes, which lacked males and resources due to the war, were more than happy to see themselves being swallowed up. If hatred is black ink that can't be bleached, then pour a large amount of water into it to dilute it. If pain is unbearable but can be forgotten with time, perhaps it would take several decades or even centuries for the underground beastmen and plains beastmen to merge. But once the underground beastmen truly devoured this new territory that always brought about war, according to our contract, both the plains beastmen and underground beastmen would become part of the Mist Alliance. Of course, assimilation and fusion were mutually exclusive. In order to prevent us from entering the cycle of war once again, I would import residents of other species, diluting and mixing the various species in a single area. This was indeed a despicable move, but it was also a brilliant move that could truly resolve the cycle of war. It was a grand strategy to end the Beastmen's invasion of the South, which happened once every few decades. Perhaps I would never be able to see such a day in my lifetime. War isn't good, but if war truly breaks out, we should at least seize the opportunity to change something. For example, completely eradicate the root cause of the next war. So I said, Orc Nation, Elven Nation, hey, why do we have to make things so clear? From today onwards, all countries and factions in the Mist Alliance will have no borders. All you need to do is follow the simplest procedures, and you'll be able to freely travel and even live in this region. This was doubtlessly a revolutionary decision. In this feudal era where land was the most important resource, population was the most important resource. Every domain lord had their own household registration system, and it would be inconceivable to allow their citizens to freely move about in any city. Just proposing such a revolutionary decision caused intense discussion and even fierce opposition within the various countries of the Mist Alliance. In fact, the Rhodes Kingdom, which had already agreed to join the Mist Alliance, immediately started delaying the negotiations to join the Mist Alliance and wanted to retreat. I object. If we give them freedom, won't all the untouchables run away? There won't be anyone to farm the land. Won't all our territories be abandoned? Absolutely not. That's because you're too harsh on your citizens. That's why you're worried about losing your citizens. I think that this is a wise decision. That way, the territories of wise domain lords will become more and more prosperous, while evil domain lords like you will have pitiful lives. You're wrong. My ancestors and I have worked very hard, but the natural environment of my territory is so vile that it's impossible to improve it. If a large number of my citizens run away, I'll be ashamed to face my ancestors. Originally, considering that the Donlon Principality's popularity was quite high, and that Sluir was currently in its weakest period of reconstruction, I could have used the prestige I'd established from the previous battles to forcefully push through this plan. However, due to the fierce opposition from the domain lords, I was unable to pass it in the end. Since the opposition was so intense that it became impossible to move people within a country, I took a step back and allowed people to move between countries. Of course, the procedures were incredibly complicated. There was also a limit to the number of people who could move every year. However, if people chose to move to Beastmen or Elves territories, they would definitely be allowed to move in batches, and they would even be given a large number of daily necessities. If I want to unite all the Mist Alliance's powers and make sure that there's no racial discrimination within the Mist Alliance, then I absolutely must realize the principle of equality and freedom of movement. It would seem that I underestimated those stubborn old-timers. Then, let's take it slow. If the first generation can't do it, I'll wait for the second generation. If the second generation can't do it, then 4 or 5 generations should be enough. Starting from today, let's use the God of Law's church to get rid of those who go too far. My goal had never changed. I wanted to make Sulphur Mountain City's glory reappear on the surface. I wanted the tyrant and holy knight to have their arms around each other's shoulders in a bar. I wanted the evil dark elves to have the possibility of becoming holy job class members. I wanted everyone to live in a country where people weren't judged by their species, but by their moral character. This was my dream, a beautiful dream that I'd had for half my life. In order for all species to live under the same blue sky, the first thing I need to do is make sure that they'll be able to put down their prejudices and treat their new neighbors. Only by doing this would I truly be able to eliminate this so-called holy war. It wouldn't be so easy for the defeated species to make a comeback. It wouldn't be considered a victory if I didn't kill them all. But would I ever be able to kill them all? I would never be able to kill them all. Hatred would only create new chains of hatred, and the wheels of war would only get bigger and bigger. In the end, all that awaited me would be mutual destruction. True equality can't be achieved without the accumulation of thousands of years. In that case, as long as I'm still alive, I'll make sure that all living beings are equal on the surface. I had already established a standard, law, for evaluating moral character. In that case, the next step would be to close the distance between all species and let them see for themselves whether their neighbors were naturally evil or not, whether they drank human blood and ate human flesh every day. Prejudices would often come from distance. The unknown would often be connected to fear. If I wanted to divert internal conflicts, demonizing neighboring countries and other species would be an excellent method. Not to mention, I would also use information channels to spread rumors without any sense of responsibility, believing that other species were eating humans for food. How could this not create new conflicts? All sorts of propaganda and rumors combined together would make most people think that beastmen were man-eating beasts, that the Cheryl Mixedbloods were a group of demons who were humans in the day and beasts at night, and that the Northland barbarians were an uncivilized species who couldn't even speak properly. Even I, the people of the Mist, was a group of uncultured and impoverished barbarians in the eyes of the countries in the Central Plains. Just like how rumors would always become more and more ridiculous as they spread, people who were filled with prejudices would only go further and further off the beaten track. Prejudices would expand conflicts, and even a small matter would become a major matter. And once a conflict became more intense, it would be time for wars to accomplish great feats and slay demons. Meanwhile, those who invaded other countries and killed women and children would be portrayed as heroes of legends. That was how the Mist Kingdom had fallen in the past. In human society, the Mist Kingdom that didn't fit in with the rest of the world became an alien species. In the end, due to the misleading propaganda, the neighboring countries treated the Mist Kingdom as the reason why they were poor. In the end, a war that shouldn't have happened in the first place erupted. Only by increasing communication and distance can we eliminate prejudices. Allowing multiple species to live together is the foundational reason for Sulphur Mountain City's miracle. Implementing such a system is the most important thing right now. I definitely won't back down on this point. Sulphur Mountain City's model was also my ideal country's experimental plot. Now that I had a path to reach my goal, how could I possibly give up on this? Perhaps I might back down on other matters, but I definitely wouldn't back down on this. As for the domain, Lord's obstruction, that wasn't a problem from the very start. Perhaps I appeared far too kind, causing others to forget what I had done in the past. Since I had already transformed into an Azura, what did it matter if I entered hell again? As long as the results were good, I wouldn't care about dirtying my hands. Eliza, the new spectators should have already been established, right? The first mission I'm giving you is to clear out all the opponents. No, all the neutral parties as well. There are no neutral parties in this matter. Do we need to directly clean them up? No. Let's first collect evidence of their crimes. I refuse to believe that these domain lords are completely clean. Don't alert them. They're all quite cautious. In that case, we're only going to collect evidence of their crimes before having those old bones from the Judgment Hall come out? Yes, we'll make ample preparations and clean them up in one go. Let's set the date to be 2 years from now. We have plenty of patience. We'll also be able to increase the Church of Law's reputation and replenish our treasury. What if one of the families is as clean as an angel? That's not entirely impossible. It's not like this is your first day following me. Do I even need to waste my breath? I just want to confirm whether or not you're still the master I'm familiar with. Perhaps a peaceful life has changed you. Perhaps the beauty of sunlight will allow you to stay away from the darkness. Was there even a need to hesitate? I would still make the same decision. Afraid of dirtying my hands? I'd probably never been clean before. If they're as pure as an angel, I'll give them another chance to choose. But if they still insist on obstructing my plan, I'll have them go to heaven to be true angels. Eliza stepped into the shadows once again, but all she left behind was an empty echo. Your wish is our command. Sandstorms swirled in the air, and the sky was filled with large floating rocks. What was even more unacceptable was that everything here was black and white, with no color at all. The monotonous black and white made one feel incredibly uncomfortable. Just looking at it for a moment made one feel dizzy and uncomfortable all over. The sandstorms that entered one's mouth, along with the violent winds, made it difficult to breathe. The mountains in the distance were slowly moving. Their towering peaks pierced the clouds. But when looking at them with binoculars, one would discover that they were actually stone giants and beasts that were as large as mountains. It was just that they were so large that their upper bodies were buried between the clouds and the floating islands. This was obviously not a place suitable for mortals to live in. This was the Earth elemental plane. On one of the floating islands, a group of visitors from the mortal plane that had just arrived had begun setting up camp. As for me, I smiled proudly as I looked at the tremendous will in the distance. Little brother Amdarokin, I wonder how you're doing? I've come to visit you. I could sense that the Earth elemental god that we were so familiar with was in a deep sleep at the core of the underground abyss. Perhaps he would be even more surprised to see us. You want to run away after offending me? No way. Just as I wanted to say a few more words to declare war, I heard dissatisfied complaints behind my back. Roland, stop smiling like an idiot. Hurry up and help set up the tent. Adam seemed quite depressed as he realized that he would be sent to the front lines as a meat shield again. Yeah, don't even think about slacking off. Do you think that just by standing on that rock and talking to yourself, you can stop working? Hurry up and help me. All right then, my goal of pretending to sigh while standing on the rock wall had been exposed. Under everyone's angry glares, I obediently went to work. Setting up camp in such an environment wasn't an easy task. The tents that the gnomes in the mortal plane had sold to us had already been proven to be fake goods. Not only would they not be able to stand up, their so-called sandproof enchantments were also proven to be a joke. They wouldn't be able to last long before being buried by the endless sandstorms. And so, after a short discussion, we decided to just dig a hole and use it as a temporary shelter. Why were we here? That would probably have to start from half a month ago. Amdarokin's insanity and hatred before he self-destructed was still fresh in my mind. His subsequent revenge was even more thunderous, and he struck us where it hurt the most, almost causing our defeat. Such a guy will take revenge sooner or later. If he goes all out and causes another Antun earthquake or Definer collapse, we'll suffer great losses. Let's take advantage of his weakness and take his life. I wasn't an idiot who would just passively deal with things. Since Amdarokin had the ability and motive to threaten me, he could come out and take revenge at any moment. Naturally, I would choose to first attack by building a wall. However, Amdarokin was incredibly strong, and he would only be stronger when he returned to the Earth elemental plane. Without sufficient power to back me up, attacking first would be the equivalent of suicide. And so, I sent out an invitation letter, but I didn't receive an answer even after a long time. Half a month ago, that familiar friend of mine finally agreed to my invitation. However, she brought an unexpected guest with her. She was an ethereal figure that flickered in and out of existence. When she took off her hood, I saw a blue-haired elven woman. Her long, silky hair reached the ground, and her crystal-like eyes had a warm smile in them. Her unfamiliar, beautiful face also had a smile on it, but the divine power undulations that rippled through her body seemed rather familiar. After a short pause, I immediately inhaled a breath of cold air. Alos, the water elemental god? Chapter 2:05. I'd rather be foolish and naive than be too ondaroken. Bye, Roland. Mist. This world originally didn't have such a maxim, but it did after me. From a certain standpoint, should an Omdaroken thank me for leaving his name in history? Cough. Let's be more serious. When Alos appeared in front of me, I thought that the Ottoman case had been exposed, and that he had come to take revenge on me. But it turned out to be a false alarm. After the wind elemental god Camdrin received my invitation, he sought out another wind elemental god who had a deep grudge against Omdaroken in order to increase his chances of victory. Back then, Omdaroken participated in the encirclement against Stone Villa. If it wasn't for the fact that Omdaroken's earth seal blocked the water connection to the ocean, my husband's Stone Villa wouldn't have died. His calm words were filled with bone-deep hatred. His crystal-like eyes were filled with a grudge that couldn't be resolved in the past. Time didn't erase that hatred, but rather made it even deeper. From a certain standpoint, Omdaroken was indeed quite powerful. At the very least, I didn't have the confidence that I would be able to live well after offending so many people. No, according to my system statistics, there are far more people who hate you than hate him. The number of unlucky people who've fallen into your traps is at least 10 times greater than his. No matter if it's the number or quality of your enemies, they're unparalleled. I've always been considering whether or not to give you the title of public enemy of the nation. Shut up. Nobody will think you're mute if you don't speak. I'm sorry, I wasn't talking about you. I hurriedly apologized in a low voice to the astonished Alos. From a certain standpoint, this was the first time that I had ever met Alos. After all, it was quite ridiculous for someone to angrily tell me to shut up when I was talking about my husband's bitter past. Fortunately, it seemed that Alos lived up to his reputation as the water elemental god. He seemed to have a good temper. He only smiled at me and didn't take it seriously. Since we have the same goal, the negotiations will naturally go smoothly. This time, in order to completely eliminate Omdaroken, we have brought a luxurious team. Although there weren't many of us, only 7 of us, the weakest among us was a legend. Marguerite, Adam, and Amelia, the 3 strongest semi-gods under my command, were all here. They would be the main fighting force. Eaglestorm, Beifong Heralt, and Renee, the 3 legends, could only act as support. This was also a chance for them to train themselves. This was already the strongest lineup that would not affect the normal operation of the northern terrain. Would Princess Renee, who brought Donglon, be affected? Actually, most of the government affairs in Donglon were handled by Kelly and the rest. It wouldn't be a big deal to bring along a living seal. As for reinforcements, I had originally only expected Camdrin to come. After all, they had already shed all pretense of cordiality. Everyone understood the principle of eradicating the source of trouble. However, I hadn't expected that the water elemental goddess would come as well. After all, for what I could remember, we still had some minor conflict with her, so she should be quite busy. The Ottoman Empire's battlefield? That's a matter between the Sea Tribe and the humans. I've already done my duty. The Storm Girl is quite concerned about you. After all, you killed 3 of her beloved pets, and even used their remains to create that monster. As long as she can spare some time, she'll definitely take revenge. Alo's words were quite trustworthy. As for Lady Storm, her reaction was exactly as I expected. Based on my understanding of her, the ancient elemental gods were indeed lacking interest in the Holy War. After all, this wasn't the first time they had experienced such a thing. The greater the benefits, the greater the risks. Without sufficient benefits, it would be impossible to make these sly old foxes obediently risk their lives. For example, back in the day, what attracted Omdaroken to do his best for the Beastmen in the Northlands War was the long-vacant guardian god divine concept of the Beastmen. And if the Earth Elemental Plane successfully connected to the Earth Elemental Plane, the ancient elemental god divine concept of the Northlands and the guardian god of the Beastmen would become a true god and rapidly become powerful. However, it was obvious that the water elemental goddess wouldn't be able to obtain these conditions even in the Ottoman Empire. The Storm Girl has always been on guard against me. It's impossible for more of the Sea Tribe to worship me. There's no need for me to fight to the end for her. But for me, revenge is the most important thing. Your matters have nothing to do with me. If you return my husband's relics to me, I'll agree to a request of yours that isn't too excessive. I'll also be willing to help you resolve this grudge." Elo's expression was quite sincere. To her, the god equipment bottle itself wasn't important. What was important was the relics that her husband had left behind. Relics? Oh, that bottle. Hearing this, I immediately turned to look at Camden. I had only used it once in the underground labyrinth to seal away the earth elemental god. It seemed that Camden's eyes were quite sharp. However, Camden shrugged with a calm expression. Back in the day, Stone Villa, who controlled the seven seas, had a status equivalent to you humans' god of holy light. Although the god equipment in his hands is so weak that it's almost dead, how could I not recognize it? I hesitated for a moment, but it wasn't because I was reluctant to part with that god equipment. After all, it didn't contain much power, and its practical use was basically zero. The reason why I was hesitating was because it was related to a super high-level quest. Congratulations for triggering the legend-ranked quest, Revival of the Primordial Sea God. The Primordial Sea God Stone Villa was once one of the strongest gods of his generation. At his peak, there were several main god-level existences under his command. That year, Lady Storm was just a rookie who couldn't even be ranked. Although he was crazy enough to challenge the Goddess of Order and had already fallen, due to a coincidence, the god equipment that contained his inheritance and secrets fell into your hands. It was even activated by the divine power of the same origin. Perhaps, in this twilight of the gods, the primordial sea gods might will make a comeback. This myth quest was quite ridiculous. It was split into 3 steps. The first step required me to gather ocean-related divine power to feed Stonevilla's ocean bottle so that it could evolve into a semi-god equipment. The reward would be an astonishing 100,000 fate points, and there would be no penalty. Based on my understanding of my ridiculous system, the greater the reward, the greater the price. With such generous conditions, this myth quest's difficulty would probably be inconceivably high. But recently, all sorts of troublesome things kept coming my way, so I tossed this myth quest to the side. On one side, there's this incredibly difficult myth quest that I might not even be able to complete even if I tried my very best. On the other side, there's the tangible benefits right before my eyes. I already have enough troubles for myself, and this has nothing to do with me. Forget about it. And so, when I personally handed the ocean bottle to Alos, she took it and held it in front of her chest, her face filled with memories and sorrow. Thank you. If only Stone Villa had been willing to listen to my advice back then, things wouldn't have ended up like this. Halfway through her sentence, Alos paused in surprise, and then her original nostalgia and sorrow completely vanished. Her beautiful face was filled with astonishment. How is this possible? There's still a divine soul within, and it's still recovering? How is this possible? Stone Villa can actually be revived? There's still hope for my husband to be revived? I had never seen anyone's expression change so quickly before. From sorrow to astonishment, from astonishment to delight, and then, in the next second, the delight transformed into despair. No, Stone Villa, I can sense that your divine soul is currently disappearing. What happened? Your divine soul was clearly quite stable just a moment ago. So why is it disappearing now? Everyone else had astonished expressions as well. Although existences like gods were like cockroaches, and it would be difficult for them to completely die, the fact that a god who had fallen for so long could still be revived was already beyond everyone's comprehension. Just when there was hope for divine soul to be revived, it was now disappearing, which was even more incomprehensible. They could understand, but I could. Hearing Alos's exclamation, I paused in surprise for a moment before I snatched back the ocean bottle. The moment it returned to my hands, the divine soul within the bottle stabilized as expected. It was obvious that this divine soul was being kept alive by the system. So, when the ocean bottle no longer belonged to me, the system lost its ability to interfere, and the divine soul naturally dissipated. Perhaps the final goal of the legendary quest, Revival of the Ancient Sea God, was to revive this mega-god. It was as if I could sense the existence of the divine soul. Just as Alos instinctively wanted to snatch back the ocean bottle, she discovered the secret behind it. Although she didn't know what I was doing, the ironclad truth was right in front of her. The divine soul that had naturally dissipated was actually beginning to reform. This completely went against the common sense of this world. How did you do it? This is impossible. I hesitated for a moment, but I still couldn't come to a difficult decision. Actually, there wasn't much to hesitate about. This ocean bottle was definitely going to stay by my side. I was hesitating whether I should laugh out loud and say that her husband was in my hands, and that if she wanted him to live, he should be obedient. Or should I get closer to her ear and smile lewdly as I said, "Milady, your husband can't leave me anymore. You should give it to me as well." All right then, in the end, I didn't say this brilliant line because the audience's gazes were too intense. I was afraid that I would get beaten up. This is my personal secret. I'm afraid that I'm the only one in this world who can protect his divine soul and revive him. All right then, I was doing my very best to remain calm and collected. However, the smile on my face betrayed how pleased I was. This was basically the heavens helping me. As long as Alos wanted to revive her husband, I would instantly have a top-notch fighter on my side. Yep, I would only be a fighter. I hated those who threatened me, such as pretty married woman, or knocking on the widow's door, Alos' expression rapidly changed. As an old fox whose age could be counted in centuries, how could she not know what it meant to be under someone else's control? The atmosphere instantly froze. At times like this, it was time to strike while the iron was hot. After I was done being the bad cop, someone else was going to be the good cop. And so I glanced behind me. Cough. Lord Alos, please rest assured. We don't have any extravagant requests. We also want to revive Lord Stone Villa, but it will be rather difficult. For example, we need the divine power of the ocean to replenish his divine soul, and the current sea gods are all so powerful that we can't afford to offend them. From a certain perspective, Renee was indeed a descendant of the mist and my disciple. She was quick-witted and thick-skinned. All I did was tell her that the ocean bottle required the divine concept of the ocean to strengthen her divine soul, and she had already guessed the crux of the matter. Her attack had hit the nail on the head. Alos' expression alternated between green and white. Even her elemental body was flashing. Even though her expression was still like an iceberg, her overly excited emotions almost caused her to reveal her true form. Speak. Just tell me what your conditions are. Rain and I looked at each other and laughed. This was no longer a negotiation. We were just sending ourselves to be slaughtered. Relax, we've always been open to discussion. You just need to. When I told her my conditions, Alos had an expression of astonishment. She wasn't astonished that the conditions were too harsh, but rather that they were too lenient. While her expression visibly relaxed, I laughed. Let's take it slow. Her expression is so tense right now. So how am I supposed to extort her? Since the crux is still in my hands, there's no need to worry about the fish escaping the hook. If I force her too much at the start, she'll easily become desperate. Let's first use some simple conditions to get her used to it. Once she falls for it, once she gets used to my orders, she'll become addicted to it. Hee hee. My snicker coincided with Renee's, and we smiled at each other. There was no need for words to be said. Meanwhile, behind us, everyone was in a heated discussion. It's over. Renee has been led astray by Roland as well. Marguerite had a helpless expression. One Roland was already troublesome enough, and Eliza, who he taught, was also super difficult to deal with. Adding on Renee, who was becoming more and more black-bellied, would indeed make one feel helpless. That might not be the case. I've never seen a normal mist descendant before. Just look at Gleena and Cavendish. Perhaps they've only awakened their potential. Their entire race is naturally perverted. Amelia viciously came to this conclusion. Looking at the two of them who were in cahoots with each other, Adam nodded vigorously as he recalled how he had always been tricked. I wasn't in a hurry to go fight Omderoken. Apart from gathering information and making preparations, there were also many things I needed to do in this elemental plane that was far away from the gods in the mortal plane. This battle and battlefield taught me a deep lesson. The appearance of god-level combat strength, such as Cavendish, Omderoken, and Felix made my heart constantly ring with alarm. High-level combat strength had an impact on the overall battle situation. Every time they acted, they almost completely turned the tide of the battle. In the past, Emperor Yonye's forbidden spell would always be able to turn the tide of the battle, but right now, I'm too weak. I'm ridiculously weak. Yes, I was too weak. It had been almost 2 years since I obtained this double diamond bloodline, but I had only just reached the silver rank. My understanding of bloodline abilities and job class abilities was still quite shallow. Perhaps this would be an amazing achievement for others, but for me, it was an unqualified result. Recently, most of my attention has been taken up by other things. I'm always walking on a tightrope, and I'll fall sooner or later. Who knows what will happen in the future? I don't have much time left, so I need to hurry up and increase my power level. Of course, level had never been a problem for me. Perhaps my true combat strength would be related to my level, but just increasing my level wouldn't bring about a qualitative change. My opponents would only become stronger and stronger. It's impossible to rely on normal methods. In that case, I'll just have to cheat a little. Life and death, an endless cycle of reincarnation? Haha, that might not be the case. Chapter 206. Life and Death. The cycle of reincarnation never ends. If the soul was the foundation of the world, then the cycle of reincarnation would be the most basic rule of the world. The living would return to the living, and the dead would enter the cycle of reincarnation to nourish the world. That was why creating a life that didn't enter the cycle of reincarnation was a taboo. Not to mention personally breaking the cycle of reincarnation and turning the dead back into the living. That was why I had never heard of anything like resurrection, which wasn't magic, in all my years of living, not to mention seeing it. Even Emperor Yonye back in the day was ambitious and arrogant, but he also knew that he had to be careful. In the end, he only broke the taboo with Lisa's matter, but El still came knocking on his door. After chatting casually, I found out that ALS' main divine concept was to maintain the boundary between life and death, allowing the cycle of reincarnation to automatically operate, pulling the souls of the dead who had just entered the cycle of reincarnation back to the mortal world doubtlessly crossed his bottom line, and the River Styx was one of his divine domains. What I did was the equivalent of robbing a police station, and he had to interfere. Not to mention the River Styx in the mortal plane. Anyone who dared to step on the red line would basically die for no reason. But here it was different. True gods weren't omnipotent. There would always be places in this world that they couldn't see. Souls have reincarnation, and the material world also needs reincarnation. The world is composed of the 4 basic elements of earth, wind, water, and fire. The elemental planes are the source of all the planes, as well as the storehouse of materials that replenish the basic structure of the world. However, the laws of the world there are far too simple. Due to the excessive accumulation of a single element and the lack of basic laws, the elemental planes even rejected the true gods' personal divine domains, becoming a forbidden zone for the true gods. Even the true gods are unable to see through it. Haha, back in the day, there were a few fellows who almost fooled me. I remembered Ale saying this back then. He was just short of saying, if you want to do something illegal, go to the elemental planes. This was the equivalent of a police officer teaching a criminal how to take advantage of loopholes. How could I possibly miss this? Of course, if Ale wanted to interfere, he could. After all, he was no ordinary true god. In fact, he only learned of this loophole after someone discovered it and died at his hands. But at this time, El naturally didn't care about it. If I was the one who stepped on the red line, he could just pretend that he didn't see it. What am I going to do? Just looking at the shivering, silly cat in front of him was enough. The little black cat curled up into a ball, its bright eyes filled with moisture, looking like a house cat that was about to be thrown into the tub for a bath, using its eyes to beg its owner to let it go. Well, do we really have to? Nonsense, you said it. I've never seen you afraid for so many years. Isn't this your dream? Why are you cowering now? The silly cat sucked in a deep breath, and her pupils abruptly shrunk before expanding again. Her incessantly trembling cat ears finally stopped. Come, I'm not afraid. However, I was hesitating. Of course, I wasn't hesitating about whether or not I should start an experiment. No matter if Heloise agreed or not, this was already in my schedule. I was hesitating about whether or not I should tell her, "Your ears have indeed stopped moving, but your tail is currently cramping. She has already betrayed you." Ahem, tail. Ah! Heloise exclaimed in shock and immediately used her cat claws to grab her tail. But unfortunately, even though she was tightly grabbed, she couldn't stop trembling as if she was cramping. After a short period of silence and embarrassment, she gritted her teeth and transformed into a blonde young girl. My ears are exposed. I continued to panic. This was the first time I had seen Heloise so flustered. Humans won't grow a black cat's tail. I continued to panic. Humans won't grow a cat's mustache either. Can't you just say it all at once? Is it fun to tease me? Teasing a cat requires doing it over and over again, right? I recorded the scene just now with a memory crystal. It's quite cute, so I'll slowly appreciate it in the future. Hey, what's the meaning of these claws? Are you planning on killing your master? I'm cleaning out my family, unfilial disciple. Watch as I leave the mountain like a fierce tiger. Fierce tiger? Haha, let the cute cat leave the mountain. All right then, the rest was just the usual chaotic fight. At the very least, she was able to relax after such a commotion. It was no wonder that she was so afraid. If she made a single mistake, her soul would definitely be destroyed, and she would never be able to reincarnate again. From a certain standpoint, it wasn't wrong to say that the older one was the more afraid one would be of death. Both she and I had too many regrets that we hadn't resolved yet, and we really didn't want to die like this. Perhaps your current physical body's simulated sensory system isn't bad, but it's completely different from real feelings. Your greedy cells are indeed capable of multiplying and replicating, and they can also simulate the metabolism of a normal life form. However, it's only a simple repetitive replication. It can only change quantity but not quality. It's impossible to recreate the growth and maturity of a normal life form on a microscopic level, which makes it difficult for you to become stronger. The endless vitality and potential of a life forms constantly growing and renewing cells is something that can never be replaced. You should have already forgotten the feeling of becoming stronger through cultivation. That feeling of awakening your body through breathing and letting magic flow through your blood vessels is something that can never be replaced. If you want to take another step forward, if we want to take another step forward, this is unavoidable. Besides, do you think I'd make a fool of you? All right then, I instantly knew that I had said something wrong. The first part of my words had greatly moved her, and her expression also calmed down. However, my last sentence was obviously unnecessary. You really dare to say that? How many times have you made a fool of me? At the very least, we're on the same boat right now. You're my magical pet. If you become stronger, that's equivalent to me becoming stronger. If you die, my soul will also be greatly damaged. Do you really think I make a fool of myself? All right then, I instantly realized that I had said something wrong again. The silly cat's tail and fur all jumped out, and even her waist-length blonde hair stood on end. The Banshee Queen, who was becoming more and more like a cat, was infuriated. It seems that you've made a fool of yourself many times as well. Hey, is there anyone who comforts someone like you? That's all the more reason to worry. I shrugged and didn't explain anything. She was no longer a rookie who had just started her career. She could grumble a little about some things, and it was enough for her to have an idea of what was going on. Soon, as Harlowe stabilized her emotions, another participant of the experiment appeared, and everything entered the beginning phase of the experiment. Shadow. I felt many emotions as I looked at this distorted shadow of light. From the very start, Frigid Maw's shadow wasn't a normal Frigid Maw. After it was hatched by an abnormal contract, its sole connection with its host was cut off. After being left here for more than 300 years, it was like a fetus that was cut off from its mother's body. In the end, it became a dead egg. No wonder the Frigid Maw tribe was unable to hatch this egg. A dead egg was already dead, so how could it possibly be hatched through normal methods? However, I was an undead mage, and I was even a former existence at the peak of undead magic. A lich, the process could be skipped, and the method of awakening the shadow wasn't exactly honorable. But in the end, I obtained an unexpected product, a half-living, half-dead nightmare. The shadow was alive. As an elemental life form, its physical body was its will and soul. It had just been born, so it was only natural that it was alive. It was also dead. It had died long before it hatched. In the end, the only thing that was able to move about in the world was the remnants of its undead magic body. Frigid Maw was originally a hybrid of an elemental life form and a soul life form. With the addition of an undead life form and my soul shard, it's impossible to predict what the final product would be. If I really had to categorize it, I'd have to use the dead as the living. The awakened shadow was incredibly dangerous. Its power level was impossible to calculate. It existed in this world, but also didn't exist in this world. Apart from AoE attacks that specifically targeted the soul, all other attacks would be ineffective against it. It was capable of feeding on souls, but I didn't know what the souls it fed to it turned into. Its existence itself can't be explained by magical theory. Shadow is actually a product that broke the cycle of reincarnation. I can now understand why it's taboo. Such an existence is far too dangerous. It instinctively desires to fill the hole in its soul and devour all life. If it wasn't for the fact that I hatched it and it listened to me based on its instincts, perhaps I would have been the first one to suffer. Originally, I had intended to use divine power to make up for it, so that it could completely evolve. However, the result was that the situation became even worse. It was indeed nourished by divine power, but its mutation developed in the worst possible direction. A product of divine power that shouldn't exist and that I didn't foresee. A divine sin. Damn it, I should have known that shadow was a divine sin that hadn't completely evolved to begin with. This was the worst possible change. Divine sins, existences that the gods were afraid of, hated the world to begin with. My hatred and anger from despair back then created its soul. Divine power and Frigid Maw's egg gave it a physical body. The moment it was born, it would definitely cause a great calamity for the entire world. Fortunately, it still hadn't developed its own intelligence. It was only its instinctive desire to destroy everything. I was able to suppress it for a short period of time, but if I was careless for even a moment, it would probably be even worse than another god-slaying battle. It would be far too much of a pity to completely seal it away. That was why I thought of this experiment. If Shadow is a dead living person, then Heloise, the Banshee Queen's incarnation of greed, is more or less a living dead person. If the two of them can fuse and evolve to make up for each other's insufficiencies, perhaps it'll be possible to reverse the cycle of reincarnation, allowing the dead to transform into the living without going through the cycle of reincarnation. In theory, this was believable. No matter how it mutated, Shadow was still a product of my soul. Heloise was once a magical pet that had formed a contract with my soul. One of them was a living person without a physical body or self, while the other was a dead person with a physical body and life. With me as the medium, the two of them harmonized their soul waves and completely used the principles of a god's descent to fuse together. That was how the scene before me came about. God's descent. Shadow descend upon Heloise. The shadow of light entered the golden-haired girl's body. Soon, the distorted light disappeared without a trace. Then, Heloise's entire body transformed into a distorted shadow that kept flashing and changing shape. Next, her entire physical body transformed into a gigantic cocoon of light. A gigantic pillar of light directly reached into the clouds. The tremendous divine might made it impossible for anyone to stay here. If everything goes smoothly, Heloise will obtain a new life and physical body, transforming into a divine life form. Perhaps she'll even have some of the divine sensibilities. Then, she can fuse with me as my magical pet. It seems that I've triggered all sorts of taboos in one go. I hope that Boss Ale won't mind. Fusing with shadow wouldn't be something that could be done in a short amount of time. I turned my attention to the other tasks at hand. In this alternate dimension, I would truly be surrounded by enemies. If I wasn't careful, I would likely fail miserably. Where's Bayphone? He still hasn't returned? As a hunter, scouting was basically his job. Ever since we set up camp, I had him patrol the surroundings, and he happily set off. He's back. He's squatting there, and he seems to be in low spirits. Renee pointed at the Draken who was hugging his leg and curling up into a ball. That bastard had even curled up his tail into a ball. I paused in surprise at this scene, and then I laughed out loud. Do you know what's going on? This is the first time I've ever seen Bayphone like this. Haha. When I came here, I was afraid that he would refuse, so I told him that we were going to another dimension. There are all sorts of strange life forms there, even ones that you've never seen before. And then he happily agreed and left those centaurs behind to come here. Renee paused in surprise for a moment before coming to a sudden realization. You tricked him into coming here? No wonder he's so depressed. I didn't lie at all. Isn't this an alternate dimension? Those Earth elemental life forms are strange enough. It's his fault for not asking clearly. Recently, he's been getting closer and closer to those centaurs. It's better to drag him out here to calm down for a few days before any scandals happen. Is this the true lie that you mentioned before? Amazing. Haha, of course. I smiled proudly. Renee seemed to understand what I meant, and she took out a small notebook to jot down notes. Meanwhile, Adam, who was behind me, pouted. Yesterday, he was still complaining that he was tricked by his disciple, and now he's shooting himself in the foot. I think this time it's going to be tough. Marguerite, why don't we make a bet? He can't afford to bet. He's definitely shooting himself in the foot again. He's far too professional at digging his own grave. How can he bet without any suspense? I ignored the loud discussions behind me and walked up to Bayfeng's side. I intended to talk some sense into our hunter since I still needed to rely on him. But the moment I walked up to him, I heard him whispering softly. Although his appearance is indeed attractive, there's no hole. What should I do if there's no hole? I immediately spat. Bayphone was actually interested in an earth elemental life form. He didn't deserve any sympathy at all. Cough, cough. I coughed lightly twice as I prepared my lines in my mind. Love knows no bounds. How can you do this? Bayphone, where's your true love? I intended to tease him first, but suddenly he stood up, raised his arm, and pointed his middle finger at the gloomy sky. Despicable heavens. Do you think you can stop me like this? So what if there's no hole? There's no hole in the world to begin with. It's only because there are so many people that holes appear. Love knows no bounds. True love is invincible. Then, the Draken's dispirited expression completely disappeared. His eyes were filled with fighting spirit, and he charged out under my astonished gaze. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, but he didn't manage to take more than a few steps before a bolt of lightning struck him. His entire body was char-black as he collapsed to the ground. I looked towards Marguerite and Adam, thinking that they couldn't take it anymore, and struck him with lightning. In the end, everyone was shaking their heads. Even Cambion's face was filled with astonishment. There's no lightning element gathering here at all. It's a pure natural lightning strike. Lightning actually appeared in the Earth elemental plane? Is this the legendary divine punishment? This is the first time I've seen it. The power of natural lightning strikes wasn't something the human mages could compare to. But the Draken, whose face was char-black, didn't surrender. He struggled to get up and continued pointing his middle finger at the sky. Despicable heavens. Don't even think of stopping my true love. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, after angrily roaring, he excitedly rolled on the ground and actually dodged a new lightning strike. He then ran off into the distance. Asterisk boom. Asterisk ah. Asterisk boom. Asterisk ah. That charred true love warrior emanated the fragrance of cooked meat, but he still stubbornly continued to run off into the distance. True love is unstoppable. Asterisk boom. Asterisk ah. It seemed that this was going to be a long battle for true love. Perhaps we wouldn't need to look for lunch anymore. Chapter 207. The weather in the Earth elemental plane was quite difficult to deal with. At least one-third of the day would be filled with sandstorms that obscured visibility. Even in a cave, the sound of the sandstorm was quite frightening. Of course, we could still go out in such weather, but there were many things we couldn't do. Still, it would be better to conserve our energy in the campsite. There were many things we could do in the campsite. Some people were adapting to the environment. Some were sharpening their swords. Some were taking a nap. And some were already unable to take it anymore. Ah, so annoying. When will this annoying sandstorm stop? This world's thick dirt makes me want to vomit. Let's hurry up and kill off Onderokin and return. Camderon, are you still not ready? Are you still as cowardly and weak as always? Please tell him to be cautious, respected Lady Alos. Before we can adapt to the natural laws of this plane, we'll only be able to use less than half of our combat strength, especially since you're countered by this plane. Meanwhile, Onderokin has endless power to replenish himself. We must first adapt to the natural laws of this plane. Boring. I'm going to sleep. Wake me up when the time is right. Yes, lady. Have a sweet dream. We were rather astonished at the interaction between the two elemental gods. Their personalities were completely different from what the legends described. In a way, Alos's icy and exquisite expression had fooled us. After a short period of interaction, her cold beauty's influence had completely disappeared. However, underneath her exquisite appearance was a fiery hot temper. Actually, it wasn't only the water elemental god who was like this. According to past experience, the other elemental gods were similar as well. Logically speaking, those who practice fire magic will become irritable and irritable. Those who practice lightning and air magic will become casual and bold. Those who practice water and ice magic will become easygoing and calm. Those who practice earth magic will become honest and generous. This should be the result of the natural compatibility of the elements. However, looking at the elemental gods before us, this was obviously not the case. It's the complete opposite of what people guessed. The storm elemental goddess, who should have been bold and unrestrained, should have been cautious, while the water elemental goddess, who should have been gentle and easygoing, is actually a fiery woman. That Onderokin, who should have been the simple and honest earth elemental goddess, turns out to be a cunning old fox. What kind of personality would a fiery and domineering fire elemental god have? She likes peace and embroidery the most. All right, later on, by chance, I discovered that my ridiculous conjecture was actually true. But now is the time for idle chatting. When we raise our doubts, Camderon explained it to us. Elemental affinity? In the past, I wasn't a cautious person, but after suffering a few losses, I naturally became cautious. As for Ms. Alos, her people were all super slow-tempered, and they could make people anxious to death when they communicated. If she continued to stay in that kind of environment, she would either become a slow-tempered person, or she would become a super impatient person like now. It's the same for Onderokin. If it wasn't for the fact that he was so black-hearted, the other earth elemental gods wouldn't have been able to defeat him. How could he possibly have survived until today? It would seem that the legends weren't necessarily true. Innate affinity couldn't compare to personality that was tempered through experience. These ancient stories were indeed quite interesting, but I didn't have the time to think about anything else right now. My own matters were quite troublesome as well. Silver dignity, Goldwill. I fell into deep thought as I listened to the sound of the wind and sand outside. This god-slaying quest had given me quite a lot of rewards. Apart from that god equipment and all sorts of random materials, the 70,000 plus fate points in my wallet instantly filled up again. This amount of fate points would at least be enough for me to upgrade some of my necessary skills and increase my overall power level to the gold rank. However, I hesitated. Every rank had a foundational difference. If I tried to take the next rank without sufficient experience and rewards, I would miss out on the necessary experience I had accumulated along the way. I wouldn't be able to make up for it even if I wanted to in the future, and it might even become a bottleneck for me in the future. This was especially so for the gold rank. Casually ascending to the gold rank wouldn't be a good thing. The level before the gold rank was the system's categorized level 1 to level 60. At this level, everyone would be using the most common basic job classes, and there wouldn't be much difference between them. Every job class's common combat techniques and skills would have already been mastered at the beginning of the silver rank. After that, the main goal would be to perfect them. In the end, quantity would transform into quality, and the basic abilities would evolve into individual characteristics, forming a unique personal style. Choice. It would seem that simply sitting here and thinking won't be enough. Progressing from one to the most proficient, and from the most proficient to the most proficient. That was the law of progress for any system of knowledge. Cultivation was naturally the same. Black iron and bronze ranks were about tempering one's physical body and activating one's own potential and talents. At the silver rank, one's combat techniques, and so on would have matured. When one's physical resources were no longer able to be improved any further, one would have to begin excavating one's own spiritual potential, combining everything one had learned in one's entire life to create one's own internal world. And at the next step, one's internal world would begin interfering with the external world. This was the so-called golden will. It was also the time when one had to make a choice. Once one's ordinary combat job class reached its peak, one would have to choose to advance to the next rank. As for advanced job classes, such as Beast Tamer and Shadow Dancer, they were only paths that had been explored by the strong in the past. Perhaps walking someone else's path would be a smooth journey and allow one to progress quickly. However, there were no two people in this world that were completely the same. Even twins who shared the same genes would be worlds apart. In the end, someone else's path would be someone else's person, and it wouldn't be completely suitable for you. Once one reached a certain level, they would eventually meet an obstacle that they couldn't overcome. Of course, there were also exceptions, such as Renee. From a certain standpoint, she was basically a female copy of Cavendish. As long as she continued walking down that path, with the same soul imprint as support, she would definitely reach a very high level. By the way, although Glena's blood change ritual went quite smoothly, Renee's blood change ritual wasn't feasible from the very start. The connection between Renee, who had already become Cavendish's god's descended body, and the Abyssal Blade was far too close. Forcefully swapping her would be no different from directly swapping her soul. Not to mention, this would touch upon Cavendish's core interests. He would most likely come looking for trouble on the spot, and this was something that was basically impossible to resolve. That was why I chose to use a more gentle method of infusing blood and potions to suppress Cavendish's bloodline so that it wouldn't be too active. This was obviously not a long-term solution. However, I could only hope that Renee would be able to find her own path at this stage and gradually increase the distance between her and Cavendish. Only then would she be able to escape the summoning of the Chaos Abyss. Don't seek power from others. Hone your techniques and willpower in battle, and form your own combat style. When I return, I hope to see a new you. As I said this, I kicked Renee out of the Earth Elemental Plane. Perhaps the Earth Elemental Plane wasn't suitable for living, but it was definitely an excellent place to train and cultivate. The environment was so harsh that one would become stronger as long as they survived. Besides, I hadn't given Renee any blood recently. I could only hope that she would be able to resist the summoning of the Chaos Abyss with her own willpower. This wasn't some strange method of a lion would push its cubs off a cliff in order to train its cubs. I had always felt that such a method was completely incomprehensible. Was the ability to climb cliffs related to survival? Cubs should grow up under the care of their parents, learn how to hunt, and have a healthy body. If I kicked Renee out of the Earth Elemental Plane before she was mature, even if she didn't fall to her death, she would starve to death. Cough. I seem to have gone off topic again. Where was I? Yep. Why didn't I give her a blood transfusion? Actually, the reason was super simple. I didn't want to die yet, nor did I want to have this strange reputation of dying from anemia. Previously, when I had given Glena a blood transfusion, I had used up nearly 1/3 of my blood. This was already a lethal amount for an ordinary person. I hadn't even had the time to replenish my blood, and I had given Renee 2 more blood transfusions. The result was that I had recently become quite anemic. Not only did I have headaches and dizziness, when I woke up in the morning, the dizziness caused by my anemia was basically incurable. My vision was blurred by Renee and Eliza twice, and I even went to the wrong door several times, which made me the butt of many jokes. My vision is blurred? That's your explanation for running around naked in the public square in the morning? You can even come up with such an excuse? Perhaps you're treating us like children. Listen to my explanation. At the time, I was in a daze following a group of people heading to the public bathhouse. When I heard them say that they were going to take off their clothes, I thought that I had already arrived at the public bathhouse. Who knew? Who knew that you actually followed Eagle Storm and Shuity's group and started taking off your clothes in the public square? By the time I realized it, it was already too late. It's not like I didn't try to fix it. That's right, you fixed it. You robbed a passerby of her clothes. Then you swaggered back home. But at this point, Eliza glanced at me coldly and pushed up her glasses. The cold disdain in her eyes made me feel ashamed. Yet, you robbed a lady of her clothes. Not only did you return home wearing a lace dress, you even made a virtuous lady walk naked in the alleyway for half an hour. Do you know how much effort we spent to convince the witnesses that it was Princess Renee who was about to change her attire and not His Highness Roland who had gone mad? It was the first time a freshman spectator went all out, and it was actually for such a mission. What a disgrace. At this moment, I was speechless. At the time, my vision was blurred, and I could only hide in the alleyway due to my dizziness. It wasn't easy for me to catch a person, so how could I care so much? That can't be right. Although I couldn't see his face clearly from the outline of his muscles, he should be a man. He was clearly a muscular man. He also happily handed over his clothes. She's Omar's good friend, a core member of the Muscle Lovers Association. To tell the truth, she's always treated this as an honor. If it wasn't for us stopping her, she probably would have bragged about her feminine charm to everyone she met. At that time, your honor would only be a small matter. You'll drag us down? All right then. As I watched Eliza approach us with evil intentions, all I could do was crouch down while hugging my head and shouting loudly, "Don't hit my head." Thinking back to the beating I received that morning, my cheeks began to hurt again. Eliza was truly vicious. I already told her not to hit my face, so there was no helping it. With what happened before, it would be impossible to give her another blood transfusion. At the very least, before I fully recovered, she could only rely on her own willpower. After sending off Renee, it was time for me to go on my way. This wasn't only a place for them to cultivate, it was also a place for me to train myself. Thinking about my future combat style and development in my room, let's test it out in actual combat. In order to reach the highest peak, I'd never even considered a high-level job class that had already taken shape. My gold rank would naturally be a path unique to me. Now that the situation in the mortal plane had stabilized, I had the time to consider my personal future. If it were anyone else, it would be impossible for them to complete the qualitative change from silver to gold in such a short period of time. However, I had countless combat experience and knowledge, as well as the system's fate points to speed up cultivation time and effects. As long as I had 2 months of actual combat training, I would be able to complete this path. Well then, everyone will meet again in 2 months. And so, according to the plan, this temporary team split up and everyone began their own preparations for battle. Onderoken wouldn't be easy to deal with. As the Earth Elemental God in his own dimension, he was capable of drawing on the power of the dimension to strengthen himself. He was basically an undefeatable existence. If it wasn't for the fact that Onderoken was obviously heavily injured and had long since entered a deep sleep to recover, I wouldn't have even bothered to chase after him. But even so, dealing with the heavily injured Onderoken was no easy task. As guests from foreign land, we would need time to adapt to the unique rules of this world. This was especially true for the 2 Earth Elemental Gods. Before they could completely adapt to the dimensional rules of this world, it was likely that they wouldn't even be able to use half of their combat strength. It was the same for everyone else. How strong a mage's performance on the battlefield would depend on how much preparation they'd made beforehand. Amelia and Marguerite both wanted time to prepare for battle. They needed to prepare the battlefield, set up traps, and create cannon fodder. They would be very busy in the future. Adam, Renee and I were the same. While we needed time to improve our power levels, we also needed to adapt to the combat environment of this dimension. 2 months would probably pass in the blink of an eye. There was another one. Cough. Let's just forget about him. What? You really have to say it? All right then, don't regret it. Beifeng's gentleman's undying body had probably been trained to the highest level. Even though he was punished by the heavens, he quickly recovered. He then left and never came back. Marguerite had contacted him before and knew what he was doing. But judging from a usually expressionless Marguerite's rare expression of disgust, I decided not to ask what exactly happened. Beifeng said that he could get a group of hired thugs to help him. I think that he'll probably be able to do it. All right then. Although this was good news, I wasn't happy at all. I didn't want to know what he did at all. I didn't want to guess at all. For the first time, I regretted asking Beifeng to help me. Soon, thanks to Marguerite's random teleportation, I put on a brown wool cape and heavy gnome goggles as I began my own cultivation journey. Ah, what a passionate master! Before I could even stabilize my footing, the entire ground began to tremble. Then, a large part of the ground suddenly caved in, and a scorpion-like monster that wasn't much smaller than a dragon crawled out. Its grayish-brown carapace was as sharp as a diamond, and the stinger on its back was gathering energy. The hundreds of eyes on its tiny head were all staring at me, filled with the desire to kill. You discovered me from my footsteps? Oh my, it seems that the next 2 months will be very difficult. Although I said that, I smiled in delight. It's been so long since I've been able to enjoy a battle so simply. Little Scorpion, let me play with you. Chapter 208. The Secrets of the Elemental Planes? I don't know either. You might as well ask the mages for information. Why are you so surprised? I am not omniscient. I seem to know a lot, but that's only because I've lived for so long. The history of the 4 elemental planes is even longer than that of the mortal plane. The creator goddess Eichi used the 4 elemental planes as the foundation to create the entire plane. I wasn't even born back then, so how would I know? When I asked Ale about the secrets of the 4 elemental gods from the 4 elemental planes, he actually gave me such an answer. When I mentioned the creator goddess, that cold, black-clothed death god actually had an expression of nostalgia and reluctance. As for the 4 elemental gods, that's just their name. They're actually nothing more than storekeepers appointed by the creator goddess. With Eichi's authorization, they indeed control a portion of the dimensional laws, but they definitely don't rule over the entire plane. Heh, nobody would be able to rule over such a plane. Otherwise, that would be the equivalent of ruling over a quarter of the world and all life. The information I obtained from other sources, Marguerite's friendly contribution, also proved the truth of ALS words. The most obvious proof was that even when the 4 elemental gods were sealed away, the elemental planes still existed. Even if an elemental god died, a new elemental god would appear in just a few hundred years. In theory, the goddess of chaos Cynthia had inherited this power from her mother, Eichi. She could control the 4 elemental gods and indirectly control this world. Cynthia's will was still influencing these planes, which was why this plane was also leaning towards chaos. Unlike what most people thought, this wasn't a world with nothing apart from the earth element and sandstorms. On the contrary, as the most ancient plane in existence, this world was incredibly rich in resources and products. All sorts of ancient species grew and multiplied here. Diamonds and rare minerals that other planes viewed as rare treasures weren't rare at all. Buried beneath these ancient hills were rare treasures that other planes would never be able to find. Most of the residents here were naturally earth elemental creatures. But unlike the humanoid elemental creatures in the mortal plane, the elemental creatures here weren't used to taking human forms. They came in all sorts of strange shapes. Some looked like dragons, some looked like stone giants, and some looked like giant crabs and other insects. Most of them chose to imitate powerful existences that they had seen before. Although their appearance and species were almost the same, they had one thing in common. At least part of their bodies were elementalized, and they could devour each other to evolve into stronger existences. It was said that Omdorokin had evolved from a weak rock giant. Due to the high concentration of elemental power The body parts of the elemental creatures here were also very good magic materials. Where there were benefits, there would naturally be intelligent creatures. Where there were huge benefits, there would naturally be gold miners who didn't fear death. After the elemental gods and other managers were sealed, these elemental planes were no different from open warehouses. There were countless ways to invade them. Many factions had established their own bases in the various elemental planes. In an area known as the Caro Hills, the mage country of Arledent had established a base in the earth elemental plane. Over 100 mage towers and magical devices had created a defensive force field. The dark purple, semicircular magical barrier prevented wind and sand from wreaking havoc in Caro Town. This made this place the largest foreign resident base in the nearby several thousand kilometers. Various species could be seen everywhere on the streets of Caro. Although most of them were humans, elves, and beastmen, which were common species in the mortal plane, there were also many demon descendants in the lower planes. It was even possible to see mechanical puppets and mimics from other worlds. Of course, there were also goblin merchants. However, there was one species that was the rarest. It was the elemental species that was rarely seen in the mortal plane. The reason for their birth was quite complicated. Some were the descendants of high-level elemental creatures and ordinary life forms, while others were the elementalization of ordinary life forms in this plane. However, the most obvious characteristic of these elemental species was their skin color, which was rather strange. Some had bumpy brown skin, some had burnt red skin, and some even had all sorts of crystals embedded in their foreheads, giving them a rather frightening appearance. However, due to part of their bodies being elementalized, they were natural elemental mages. They had excellent elemental perception abilities, and with just a bit of training, they could become outstanding elemental mages. They didn't need to worry about elemental magic backlashes or anything like that. For the mage country, apart from the various local specialties of this plane, these native elemental sons were all excellent seedlings. And for earth magic masters, this earth elemental plane, with its extremely high elemental density, was also the best place to cultivate. Not to mention, there were all sorts of rare magical beasts here. So how could they just give up on this place? But recently, this place had met with some trouble. The earth elemental god had returned, and these uninvited residents were finally going to face the returning master of the house. It was quite obvious that as the nominal master of this world, Onderoken, it was impossible for him to have a group of uninvited guests living in his home. More and more local residents suddenly changed their attitudes towards Caro City, and the beast horde attacking them became more frequent. And the rising elemental tide and the return of the earth elemental god caused the sandstorms to become even fiercer. Caro's protective barrier's energy consumption had already reached more than 150% of last year's energy consumption. We can't go on like this. The Earth elemental plane's spatial shackles were becoming more and more stable, and the amount of magical energy needed to transmigrate between planes was constantly increasing. And the amount of investment needed here was constantly increasing. As a native elemental mage, Itadia was quite troubled. More than 10 years ago, Itadia had joined the mage country as a mage apprentice. Now that he had become a gold rank mage, Itadia was quite familiar with this city. But recently, he had been feeling more and more uncomfortable, as if this beautiful city where magic civilization gathered was a type of restriction, and in the depths of the wilderness, there was a will that was summoning him. And he wasn't the only one feeling this way. In the past 3 months, more than 10 young apprentices had already disappeared into the sandstorms, leaving behind only their mage robes and staffs. Onderoken, how troublesome. As a gold rank mage, Itadia definitely wasn't an ignorant rookie. Only the legendary elemental god would be able to have such a huge impact on the entire earth elemental plane. He was quite powerful and could resist the summoning from his soul, but it would be difficult for those rookie apprentices to do so. Every single elemental species was precious, and it would be quite painful to lose them for no reason. That wasn't even the most troublesome part. 2 days ago, a demonized apprentice had actually crazily rushed into the Earth Elemental Plane's magic core, intending to turn off the barrier launcher. That was quite shocking. There's still no reply from the mage country? At the very least, send us a few archmages to control the situation. No, the mage country is also in trouble. The Bardi Empire suddenly had a small skirmish with us, and most of our combat strength has been lost. And from my private sources, I learned that the Water Elemental Plane and Wind Elemental Plane are also in similar trouble. Plus, teleportation between the elemental planes is becoming more and more difficult. I'm afraid that not only will our assistance not increase, it might even decrease. If there's a problem with teleportation, can't we use the gnome's teleportation system? Their dimensional tearing devices should still be usable, right? A fixed failure rate of 20% is too much. Teleportation of resources is fine, but teleportation of living creatures is too dangerous. Also, those gnomes recently changed their rules. They actually want us to buy insurance, or else they won't let us transport the goods and they won't compensate us if we lose them. Insurance? What's that? It's something that's recently trended among the gnomes. I think it's from the underground world's gnomes. You have to pay them a deposit first, and if there's an accident that causes a loss, they'll compensate you. Isn't that a good thing? Then let's buy it. Didn't we already pay for our teleportation losses in the past? The problem is that we didn't even pay for it. Archmage Edwin, who's in charge of teleportation, is furious. Why? Aren't gnomes supposed to be very sincere in their dealings? He said that we stored a special magnetic energy item in the goods, which affected teleportation. This was a failure caused by our human error, and he wants us to compensate for the losses. Ridiculous. Why didn't you say so earlier if special items couldn't be used for teleportation? You only said it after you failed? What about the next time? Archmage Edwin probably won't give them any more excuses. Our luck was even worse the second time. We encountered a spatial storm, and half of our goods were lost. He should be paying for it this time, right? No, there's a clause in his insurance contract that says no compensation for losses caused by force majeure. That teleportation error caused by a natural disaster like a spatial storm was counted as force majeure. Then why do we even buy that insurance? Isn't this a scam? Isn't there someone to pay for our teleportation losses? Yes, we only realized after we suffered a loss that we have to buy a special teleportation loss insurance to pay for the teleportation losses. In the end, the third time, Archmage Edwin simply signed all the additional clauses. Don't tell me we were scammed again. Don't tell me that gnomes actually tear up business contracts. This time, the spatial tearing device actually exploded. Only then did we realize that in this situation, we have to buy that accidental explosion insurance, or else we won't pay for it. Bye. Can't we just buy everything? But the problem is that explosion insurance is more expensive than all the other insurances combined. But everyone knows about gnomes. Not buying that explosion insurance is equivalent to not having insurance at all. Archmage Edwin was so angry that he had a stroke on the spot. Etadia's mouth gaped, but no words came out. But this matter was not over yet. The mage apprentice said with an expression that did not know whether to laugh or cry. The gnome merchants in our city have also learned this trick, selling all kinds of insurances like crazy. And haven't there been a lot of elementals going missing recently? Those fellows actually bought a personal accidental disappearance insurance, specifically looking for young apprentices to sign it, and even openly announcing the disappearance of people, causing everyone to panic. Did they pay for it? There's no need to answer. I've already guessed it. They definitely didn't pay for it. Your wisdom can illuminate this piece of sky. Yes, this group of damned profiteers, they didn't pay even a single copper coin. They actually need the policyholders to apply for compensation themselves. People are already missing. How are we going to get them to pay for it? Suddenly, a sharp voice sounded behind him. Hello, I'm from the Gnome Amway Life Insurance Company. May I ask if you know Amway? Etadia turned around. It was a short gnome who was well-dressed, carrying a handbag in his small hands and a face full of smiles. Did you know? Recently, a group of kidnappers appeared, causing the number of missing elementals to skyrocket. But our Amway Life Insurance Company, in response to such a situation, especially, I don't know what kind of insurance you need if you're not satisfied with any of them. Scram! Itadia, who had always been known for being approachable, angrily roared through his teeth, but the gnome salesman had no intention of giving up. Rolling injury insurance? We have it too. Although I don't know why the demand for insurance has skyrocketed recently. Customers are always the king. You can roll, I'll pay. In Cairo City's Archmage Council, myth-ranked Archmage Cade also had a worried expression. As the highest-ranked Archmage here, he knew far more than his subordinates. As a true top-level Archmage, the Truth Overseer's intelligence system wouldn't forget to give him a special report. Of course, he naturally knew that the situation in the Bardi Empire had been rapidly changing recently, especially the conflict between the Bardi Empire and the Bardi Empire. This definitely couldn't be described as a small conflict, and if it wasn't handled well, a new war would break out. Reinforcements from the Bardi Empire couldn't be relied on. The environment was becoming even worse, and the threat of the legendary Omdorokin was becoming more and more apparent. Not only that, but there were also problems within the Bardi Empire. Teacher, those damn gnomes are becoming more and more outrageous. Not only are they spreading rumors everywhere and shaking the hearts of the people, they've even recently started raising prices and profiting from the country's crisis. Why don't we chase them away? It seemed that the gnomes had truly gone overboard this time for the normally calm Itadia to be so angry. And we could just starve to death. 70% of our business system is in the gnomes' hands. Perhaps he can teach us how to use magic to make bread. His other disciple, Saranto, was still as calm as ever, but his sarcastic tone made Itadia quite displeased. You think the gnomes are difficult to deal with only because you're too simple-minded. Then our great scholar Saranto will be able to deal with those greedy misers. All right, then I'll send you to talk to them about the issue of the recent increase in food prices. I can't do it either, but that doesn't mean that no one can. I'll recommend someone who can actually gain an advantage in negotiations with the gnomes. The gnome's contract has more than 50 clauses that are 7 to 8 pages long. That fellow's contract actually has more than 800 clauses that are as thick as a book. He's able to make the gnomes dizzy just by talking about it. Recently, he's been relying on negotiations with the gnomes to earn money. Now, wherever he appears, those misers will immediately surrender and hand over their bottom line. Saranto's words caused the other two archmages to be astonished. To be able to win against the cunning gnomes in business negotiations, such a person was completely unimaginable and incomprehensible. Is he a great merchant from there? No, he looks like a ranger who's here to hunt. Negotiating is just a side job that he occasionally returns to the city. He spends most of his time outside hunting. His strength isn't much, but his luck is quite good. What do you mean? He's clearly just a silver-ranked warrior class, but the first time he entered the city, he actually brought along the venomous stinger of the supreme demon scorpion. That's a powerful opponent that even a gold-ranked warrior wouldn't dare to face alone. Perhaps he's hiding his true strength. If he's alone outside, it's not that surprising. That's what everyone thought at first, but we met the prophet Archmage Alu. He was indeed a silver-ranked warrior, but what shocked everyone was what happened afterwards. The second time he returned, he brought back an Earth Elemental Commander's crystal core. That's definitely not something that a gold-ranked warrior can deal with. And after that, the prey he brought back became stronger and stronger, and the time between each trip also became shorter and shorter. And at this point, Saranto intentionally paused, as if he was keeping everyone in suspense. Only when he saw that his master and senior were both looking at him did he continue proudly. The most recent time he returned to the city, he brought back the heart of a magical mountain giant that had undergone its second evolution. A magical mountain giant would require a gold-ranked warrior to deal with. For a second evolution, even a legend-ranked warrior might not be enough. How is that possible? That's a qualitative change. In such an environment, even I would have to be careful when facing off against a powerful mountain giant. This time, it was Cade's turn to be astonished. Does he have a team to support him? How is that possible? He came in here to eat meat and sleep. while leaving his entire team to eat sand outside. Also, detection magic showed that the moment he left, he headed straight for a high-danger area. His prey would most likely only suffer frostbite or cut damage, so he should be an ice-type magic swordsman. Frostbite? In this place where the water element is almost non-existent and ice magic's power is greatly reduced, he could cause frostbite to an earth elemental creature. This was even more unusual. Archmage Cade was now interested in this legendary person. Arrange a meeting for me. I'm getting curious. Right, what's his name? Roland, but his nickname seems to be Blackhand. Blackhand Roland. Hearing this, Cade instantly stood up, his face filled with astonishment and disbelief. But after a dozen seconds, he shook his head. If it's him, then anything can indeed happen. Arrange for me to meet him as soon as possible. Forget it. I'll go meet him personally. You guys should come with me as well. Perhaps he might even be your senior. Chapter 209. This was the home of the earth elementals. According to the most basic principle of elemental suppression, where there was more earth elementals, there would naturally be less water elementals. While water became extremely precious, there was also a lack of ice and water magic in this area. Using elemental magic required control over the power of the elements. Using water elemental power and ice elemental power in such a severely imbalanced place was like trying to create artificial rain in a desert. Not only was it much more difficult, but its power would also be greatly reduced. Not only that, this reduction had nothing to do with one's personal strength. The stronger a mage was, the more they needed to borrow power from nature. Forbidden spells that could topple mountains and overturn seas were the product of a person resonating with the world. As a result, ice and snow mages were greatly weakened here. This was also the reason why most of the mages in Karo City were earth mages. In such an environment, it was incredibly easy for them to train, and their actual combat strength would increase by several levels. As for the strange method of tying countless weights to one's body and turning into a super scion after taking them off, it seemed to be more suitable for warriors whose brains were all muscles. Magic was an intricate skill that required logic, and the slightest error could lead to a huge loss. Not only would living in a place with a lack of elemental energy not benefit, but it would also cause the body to be isolated from the elements it cultivated for a long period of time, causing the power of the elements to weaken. If it was the kind of legend who lived in a low magic area and suddenly became a super strong person in a high magic area, it would obviously be more suitable for the main characters in night novels. If it could be done in real life, then when the elemental tide came, wouldn't everyone become superhumans, and mage apprentices would become archmages? But sometimes the world was just that illogical. In this land that was isolated from snow and rain, there was actually a group of frozen corpses. These were a group of sly underground lava spiders. They hid underground for a long time and were skilled in ambushes and ambushes. Pedestrians and passing magical beasts would often have their legs bitten by these spiders and sink into the ground. Then, their 16 sharp stone pincers would tear apart the prey that fell into their trap. And right now, these dangerous existences were all stiffly lying on the ground. There were only tiny wounds on their bodies, but what took their lives was a fatal chill that entered their bodies through their wounds. As for me, I was rather vexed. It wasn't because of the enemies before me, but rather, oh my, it's really disgusting. Under the temporarily constructed barbecue rack was sliced underground lava spider thigh meat. After heating and peeling the skin, there were actually some snow-white slices of meat under the thick layer of soil and carapace. However, when it was really cooked, there was a disgusting lime smell. Tui, 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 I failed again. Even though I said that, I still furrowed my brows and bit down. The 64th Otherworld delicacy has been achieved. You are 36 dishes away from the title of Culinary God. Nothing taboo. You are 9,936 dishes away from the epic achievement, the man who stands at the top of the food chain. However, since this species had 16 legs, it did not meet the requirement of four-legged creatures that eat everything except chairs, so it could not be included in the achievement. And because the taste of this species is not even half as good as the legendary stargazy, The achievement Stargazy is delicious cannot be activated. Please keep up the good work. Sigh, looks like this is going to be troublesome. I have to find some four-legged ones that taste even worse. Pooey, am I an idiot? It's not like I want to make that damned achievement. That's right, I never had any strange hobbies. I had long since learned about the system's ridiculous achievements. Either they were indeed useful, but the process of obtaining them was incredibly ridiculous, or I mysteriously obtained them, but the effects were ridiculous. At any rate, I would feel uncomfortable if I didn't torment myself. I had also seen the requirements and effects of this series of achievements. I was rather interested in the achievement of the man who stands at the top of the food chain. The epic achievement, the man who stands at the top of the food chain. You have eaten 10,000 types of living or non-living creatures that ordinary people wouldn't eat. You have obtained the honorary title Bear Void Devourer. After equipping this title, you will have a tremendous amount of power over all animals. You have obtained the skill Bear Boss's Gaze. Any target that is targeted by this skill will be in mortal danger and will be unable to move for a short period of time. System-friendly reminder. This skill has a special effect on Bayfeng. System-friendly reminder. Yes, Bayfeng has long since stopped treating us as humans. I finally understood what the system meant when it said that you weren't human, and this additional skill was actually quite useful. After all, a battle between powerful individuals could be decided in an instant. Just a gaze alone would paralyze and freeze the opponent's body, just like Medusa's eyes of petrification. It was a super practical and powerful talent. But from another perspective, the better the effects, the more ridiculous the requirements were. I had to eat 10,000 different species for a year, and they had to be species that ordinary people wouldn't even want to eat. This was basically a marathon hellish journey that I wouldn't even consider. And the reason why I had eaten 60 to 70 different species in just a short month was because I was hungry. All the food and bags I brought with me had been destroyed in the endless battles. These strange earth elemental plane creatures were usually quite large in size and had a large attack range. For example, if a large mouth suddenly appeared and swallowed me whole, I would be injured if I wasn't careful. My skin was thick, so it was fine, but my clothes didn't have that ability. If it wasn't for the fact that I could replenish my energy in Karo, I probably would have made another achievement from the system, such as the number of times I could run around naked and how long I could last. But even so, if it wasn't for Irene Bela's ice armor protecting me, I would probably still be naked most of the time. Although I managed to preserve my face, I couldn't eat my stomach. I couldn't just walk a few kilometers and then go back to replenish my energy, right? And so, I could only learn from Bear Grylls and eat whatever I saw. I also managed to obtain some achievements along the way. Fortunately, I had the title Hungry Can't Be Picky. After equipping it, my appetite doubled, and my resistance to poison and disgusting foods increased. That was why I wasn't poisoned or so disgusted that I couldn't eat anymore. Wah, it tastes like paraffin or lime powder. It's so disgusting. Even this disgusting isn't even half as good as the original Stargazy. Just how disgusting is British food? It was so disgusting that it made me want to cry. But since I needed to replenish my stamina and mana, I had no choice but to forcefully eat it. Irk, what's this? It's so disgusting. It's so stinky. Spider eggs, Irk? Finally, even though I had the title Hungry Can't Be Picky, I was unable to endure it any longer and began to vomit. All right then, I had eaten for nothing for half a day. But after I finished vomiting, I still had to continue looking for food. After all, I didn't even know when my next battle would be. Damn system, this thing isn't even half as good as the original Stargazy. It's so disgusting. Is this even food? I can tell you quite clearly that it's far from enough. If you spend 100 fate points, I can exchange for a plate of the original Stargazy for you. It'll definitely be delicious. Don't even think about it. I won't believe it. I already clearly remember what happened last time. It was enough to be scammed once. It would be quite foolish to fall into the same trap a second time. Previously, I had thought about exchanging for food from the system. In the end, even though the fried noodles looked delicious, I instantly lost consciousness after eating them. When I woke up, I discovered that all the scammy food I ate had increased my achievement points by 1. Perhaps my soul had even gone on a one-day trip to the river Styx. I'll have to rely on myself. That thing over there looks like a lizard, so it should be edible. Big lizard, wait for me. 3 days later, a legend-ranked dragon heart appeared on Caro's market. This type of dragon subspecies that could burrow into the ground had astonishing strength. Not only did it burrow extremely quickly, but it was also skilled at summoning sandstorms. It was incredibly difficult to deal with, and that dragon heart instantly sold for an astronomical price. However, I only had one comment about it. Crunchy, chicken-flavored. Give me another dozen. Choosing to train myself in the Earth Elemental Plane would doubtlessly be the stupidest choice I would make if I were a pure ice mage. But for me, with the system's help, improving myself was never a problem. Discovering the path that was most suitable for me was the most important. Intentionally absorbing large amounts of Earth element into my body would be no different from slow suicide for other ice and water element users. But for me, it was a grand gamble, an important gamble that would affect my future development. Construct Ice Mountain Sword. Create Wall of Eternal Ice. Chapter 2:10. I still remember back in the snowy mountains when the Lion King Gay Ming asked me what my source magic was and how I understood magic. I laughed out loud. I've already found it, so it's always been by my side. My magic is to draw out my soul world. In that case, all I need is a paintbrush. That's right, when I obtained the Ice Treader's soul imprint, my path of ice and snow was already very obvious. I would learn from nature, imitate nature, recreate nature, and surpass nature. Source magic, ice and snow paintbrush. Condensing the elements of ice and snow into blocks and changing their forms was the effect of the quasi-level 1 spell, ice and snow shaping. It could be said that every mage could use this spell. After all, before throwing out an icicle, the sharp point should be able to injure someone. Not only did ice magic have this spell, but all sorts of elemental and arcane magic spells also had this spell. Using magic to communicate with the elements to create a stone wall or an icicle is probably something any apprentice can do. However, I'm afraid that even noobs don't know how many steps are involved. After all, what they're doing is just chanting the incantation and paying magic power. As for how exactly magic power works, they probably don't even think about it. Elemental shaping? It's actually the most basic elemental shaping, an elemental shaping that has no offensive power at all. It seems that we've met an incredible successor. We thought that we would meet another idiot who would be fooled by high-level magic and choose powerful offensive magic. Yep, I'm definitely not talking about my first-generation partner. He's indeed a bit foolish, but he's a good person. Even now, I still remembered that when I chose elemental shaping, those old monsters were laughing so happily, as if I had done something amazing. Although elemental shaping was simple, it was the foundation of all sorts of magic. It was a simple rearrangement of the elements, and by itself, it had almost no offensive power at all. However, I unhesitatingly chose it. Controlling mana, resonating with the elements in the outside world, communicating with the elements, calculating the required volume model, transferring the will and model, paying the mana as payment. The attracted elements will begin to gather and form the required order, completing the molding process. These are the basic steps for ordinary elemental molding. But if I turn this into foundational magic that's like a living creature's instinct, then I only need to tell the elements what I want. There's no need to think about anything else. I spread out my arm, and invisible ice fairies appeared. The moment they appeared, they frowned. It was obvious that the dense earth element here was suffocating them. This wasn't an environment they liked. However, under my will, they continued to circle around me and started to weave the scene in my heart. Illusory snow elves revealed their true appearances in the air. 1, 2, 10 a group, countless more. The snow elves on the outermost layer began to construct an isolation zone. The flying snow elves were currently dripping silver-white tears of light. When these tears of light fell, a gigantic glacier would rise from the ground. These crystal-like fairies weren't actual existences. They were the product of my mana and elemental power. In the past, I would only be able to see them by using forbidden spells. But now, I would need to rely on them to cast foundational magic. This was also the reason why foundational magic couldn't be widely used. A gigantic iceberg abruptly appeared in the middle of a sandstorm. In front of this iceberg, even the mountain giant was nothing more than a tiny dwarf. Unlike a projection of my soul world, this iceberg was an actual product. Even in the mortal plane, I was unable to create such a large iceberg. My foundational magic speed also meant that I would be able to conserve a large amount of mana, which was why I was able to create such a gigantic iceberg domain. Since I have paints and brushes, let's begin painting. It was already quite inconceivable for a silver-ranked mage to be able to accomplish such a feat, however. This was only the beginning for me. What I needed to do next was the second reason why I needed to stay away from the god's line of sight. In that case, let's create a world that belongs only to me. Recreate Wall of Frigid Winter Earth. I would choose to revive myself instead of simply repairing my phylactery. The main reason was that semi-god undead had limited potential, and my future opponents would be far too powerful. As the elemental tide increased, invaders from every dimension would return to this world to enjoy their holy war. However, the most dangerous part would still be the revival of the ancient gods. Forget about the others. I can still try, no matter how powerful the enemy is. If the two venerated goddesses of order and chaos awaken, no, they don't need to awaken. If they only create an incarnation of their will, we can probably only laugh at them. Indeed, I had considered what would happen if something went wrong with my plan and the two goddesses of order and chaos awakened, or if they noticed that something was wrong and risked being injured to awaken ahead of time. It's nothing. They'll all die within 3 seconds. After all, even I won't be able to block a single attack from them, even if they're in a weakened state. This has nothing to do with power level. They're the children of the creator goddess, the true masters of this world. They're born with special privileges. When Ale said that he would definitely be no match for the two goddesses of order and chaos, he had a relaxed expression as if he had long since accepted it. However, for me, even though it was within my expectations that the two goddesses of order and chaos would be unable to resist, I was still filled with bitterness when I truly confirmed that the two goddesses of order and chaos were so powerful that they were impossible to resist. After all, if a plan had a fatal flaw from the very start, it would make one despair no matter what. And in that future, after the two goddesses of order and chaos awakened, they were indeed unstoppable, which led to a calamity. He created this world, and her power was inherited by the goddesses of order and chaos. That meant that any concept or object born in this world would either belong to chaos or order. There were no exceptions. This also meant that if the people of this world used the power of this world, it would be the same as using flames to attack the fire element. It would be meaningless. In that case, were they truly undefeatable? Perhaps this was indeed the case for others. But for me, the answer was no. I wasn't a soul from this world, nor would I enter the cycle of reincarnation. This was just like how there was a rule that prevented the people of this world from attacking the goddesses of order. However, my soul didn't even originate from this world. The light of law that I had created was fated to become their mortal enemy. But just this alone wouldn't be enough. The power of law was inclined towards protection. It was the chaos within order, and there would be no chance of victory if it was only defense. If law was to be used as a sturdy shield, then I would need a sharp sword that could threaten even the overgods. Doubtlessly, how to find an existence in this world that was superior to the goddesses of order was an unsolvable problem. But what I was most skilled at was finding a way out where there was no way out. Right now, even though there was clearly no correct answer for me to choose from, I had to forcefully come up with an answer. If I used any unorthodox methods, there would be an answer. Since it's impossible to find this world, then let's create a new one. That's right, even I felt that it was inconceivable. But I was indeed intending to challenge the power of the creator of order and order. You're insane. Ha, you just realized? All right then, Just coming up with this idea already made Ale feel that I was insane. But since the enemy was the chaos god who created the world, normal methods would be ineffective from the very start. Normal people wouldn't even think of challenging them. If I went insane from the very start, perhaps I would even have a slight chance of winning. How to create a world? I didn't know either. Fine then, that would be far too difficult. But I could imitate the true creator of this world, He. Since her power split into two to create order and chaos, then could it be said that He herself was the combination of order and chaos? In that case, could it be said that the creator who created the world had to have both the identity and power of order and chaos? Her soul had to not belong to this world that had already been created, so that she wouldn't be bound by it. When I came to this conclusion, my first reaction was, "System, tell me the truth. Are you trying to scam me again? Why did you provide me with a physical body that was a mixture of two different powers? No, I should say, why did you tempt me to choose this physical body?" I carefully recalled the scene at the time. That physical body was on a completely different level compared to the other physical bodies that He had provided me with. Not only that, the fate points were perfect, so it was only natural that I would choose this physical body. And when I met Ale again, he even exclaimed in admiration, "I really don't know how you managed to create such a body from such a small amount of origin blood. It's so mystical. You're basically the creator's power." And when I questioned him, I only received a vague answer. All right then, I won't comment on why he clearly refused to answer, but still typed out a series of exclamation marks. It was obvious that he was trying to deceive himself. But from a certain standpoint, this tacit admission made me smell the scent of a scheme, and I felt quite sick of it. But before I could threaten him with not doing anything, my system spoke up first. We're on the same side. Our goals are the same. If you die, I die. If you live, I live. In the end, my system became serious for once. It used its own standpoint as an answer. Even if it didn't answer what I asked, its meaning was quite obvious. I won't tell you the specifics, but we're on the same side. That's why I didn't trick you this time. In fact, this choice was correct. Your guess was correct as well. I was naturally dissatisfied with such a vague answer. But my system had been with me for more than 300 years, and I still couldn't find a way to beat it up. In the end, I could only helplessly accept it. All right, now that I solved the problem of my identity as the creator goddess, all that was left was how to create and what I intended to create. What I wanted to create was decided from the very start. Naturally, it would start from the deepest part of my soul. That frozen Northlands was my home and my heart. Transforming it into something I wanted to create was the only possible choice. As for how to do it, it was even simpler. I simply had to imitate He. He's world was constructed using the four elements. However, these elements came from the four elemental planes. The four elemental planes had a much longer history than the goddesses of order and chaos. Directly using elemental power would naturally be within the control of chaos. However, using the power of the four elements to construct a new world would naturally be beyond the goddesses of order and chaos jurisdiction. I didn't need to create a true world. I only needed to engrave my soul world of the infallible Definder and depict the northern ice plains that were engraved in the depths of my soul. It would be enough for me to create a small foreign land. Perhaps this foreign land could give birth to an existence that could threaten the two goddesses. Perhaps as long as we could pull the two goddesses into this foreign land, we would have a chance at victory. Perhaps this foreign land would be able to cancel out the enemy's divine concepts and isolate them from the endless power of the world. There were too many possibilities that were impossible to predict, but at the very least, we would finally have a chance at victory. When I realized this, I began to make my preparations. I started calculating the steps needed to reach my goal. Through my hard work during this period of time, I had already obtained quite a few bargaining chips. Lack of magical theory? Marguerite and Amelia had both provided me with large amounts of information. The elemental information that I had obtained, stolen, from Cairo City was also quite valuable. But the person who gave me the greatest inspiration was Eliza. She used the conflicting elements of ice and fire to create her own soul imprint, which gave me a great revelation. At the very least, she proved that the relationship between the elements wasn't as simple as opposing each other. The four elements that create the world. He's world is made up of air, fire, water, and earth. It's actually so similar to the theories on Earth. Back when idealism was prevalent, the East believed that the elements that created the world were earth, water, fire, and wind, while the West believed that the four elements were earth, air, water, and fire. From a certain standpoint, they were astonishingly similar. Lack of practical theories about creation. This was doubtlessly the most direct proof of this. All I had to do was stack the four elements on top of each other. The seal of the four elements was an ancient forbidden spell that created a sealed dimension together. This was doubtlessly a form of creation. Did it require the simultaneous use of four different elemental powers? Haha, now you know why I was willing to pay any price to develop the 4 elemental swordcaster job class, and why I was still called the 4 elemental swordcaster job class, even though it clearly used more than just 4 sword seals. Activating the 4 elemental sword seals at the same time would create a relatively perfect elemental cycle. In that case, this step was solved, but there was a small problem after that. In order to create a sword seal as the foundation of a new world, I needed materials that were at least at the god equipment level. Right now, only Stonevilla's ocean bottle met these requirements. If I only had one, it wouldn't even be enough for the preliminary experiments. Fortunately, after I killed Omdaroken that day, he left me the gray earth elemental heart, which was also a god equipment level elemental material. Currently, these 2 god equipment were covered in runes. They had already undergone internal modifications. Of course, in terms of grade, the earth elemental heart was far inferior to Stonevilla's ocean bottle, but it was still fine for experiments. Once I succeeded, I would naturally find a replacement. What was a replacement? How about the native earth elemental heart that imprisoned Omdaroken's divine soul? This earth elemental heart was of the same quality and was even stronger. The divine soul contained within it was suitable for one of the 4 pillar gods to nurture a new world. Yep, from the very start, I didn't have good intentions. Problems were raised one after another, difficulties were tackled one after another, and bits and pieces of chips were collected. Finally, it was time to take this crucial step. I was still using the power of the elements to depict the tundra of the Northern Territory in my mind. But at this stage, how could I be satisfied with just a soul world that was similar to magic? What I wanted was to use my own pen to draw out a real world. This was the path that I had chosen. Haha, come, original sin demon god, war angel, a blinding golden light intertwined with the red lava. After my entire body was stinging, they naturally fused together. The light that they emitted was a calm white, just like the sun. When too many colors fused together, the result would either be a chaotic pitch black or a harmonious pure white. Without a doubt, this white light represented a miracle. My order and chaos bloodlines, which were of the same origin, were actually beginning to fuse together. If it wasn't for the fact that I had reached this step, I probably would never have known that the 2 seemingly conflicting transformation talents of my Arbiter bloodline were actually meant to be fused together from the very start. My emotions mysteriously calmed down as everything around me melded into my senses. My lava skin transformed into dark red runic armor, and my body naturally floated in midair. Beneath the skeleton of a demon's wings were wings of light that only the highest level angels could possibly possess. My arms were filled with endless power. For a fanatic worshiper, this appearance that symbolized the coexistence of order and chaos was the greatest sin of all. If it wasn't for the fact that the earth elemental plane blocked off the senses of the gods, trouble would have immediately arrived. And I knew that I didn't have much time. In just a few seconds, more than half of my mana had been lost. In this form, my mana was comparable to that of a legend rank mage, but I still wouldn't be able to last more than a few seconds. Whether I live or die will all depend on this step. Even though I already had a theory, there were far too many gaps in it, not to mention the difference between theory and practice. But right now, I didn't have the capital to experiment over and over again. The arrow was already knocked on the bowstring, so it had to be fired. Create wall of eternal ice. Within the ice mountain, Stonevilla's ocean bottle began to flash with a snow-white light. Meanwhile, the earth elemental heart also began to float in midair. Its earthen yellow light was already stirring up a sandstorm. If it wasn't for the fact that I had already set up a barrier of ice and snow, it was likely that I would be able to see it from thousands of kilometers away. The earth elemental heart was struggling as if it knew that its end was near. But right now, it had nowhere to run. A world with only ice and snow can't be called a true world. In that case, let this world of ice and snow have true frozen earth. While something was happening in the earth elemental plane, an earthquake, or perhaps it should be called a dimensional earthquake, occurred in the divine domain where the gods were gathered. Indeed, apart from an extremely small number of existences, the gods were unable to see through the unknown dimensional walls. However, there were some things that didn't require eyes to see. Lord Ale, I've brought a message from the gods. An earthquake suddenly occurred in the Church of Fate. It seems that something important has happened, but they asked the god of fate. The god of fate shook his head and didn't say anything. Rumors are spreading everywhere, and the situation is quite chaotic. That's why the gods have invited you to discuss this matter. The winged messenger, Eros, was once a famous hero in the mortal world. He was famous for being able to travel thousands of kilometers in a single night. But in the death god's church, he was nothing more than a despicable angel who didn't even dare to breathe loudly. That's why they're here to ask me. I don't usually pick them up. Eros' tone was light, but it was filled with dissatisfaction. Even a god envoy would be filled with fear when facing the most ancient death god. If Ale used him to vent his dissatisfaction towards the gods, then, as a Valkyrie, Eros wouldn't be able to escape. Wait a moment. Let me go together with you. There's something I want to discuss with you. Eros was overjoyed at the unexpected turn of events, but Ale continued speaking. You go first. I'll come over as soon as I make some preparations. What else could Eros say? He hurriedly left as if he had just been pardoned. This death god's church was giving him far too much pressure. But right after Eros left, the cold-faced Ale suddenly laughed out loud. The sand table behind him began to automatically rearrange itself. The next instant, Roland and the situation around him were displayed in front of the death god. Roland, you're truly daring. You actually found the right path. Perhaps everything will change because of this. If an outsider were here, they would never have thought that heir, who had a cold expression for thousands of years, would actually smile with satisfaction. At the next moment, the Grim Reaper also started to move. However, before he left, the arm under the black robe gently patted the sand table. Asterisk boom. Asterisk, all the sand instantly transformed into flying sand. And in the next second, all of Caro's connections to the mortal plane were severed. No, it should be said that all of Caro's connections to the earth elemental plane were severed. But right after that, Ale hesitated, and then he continuously patted the sand table 3 times. Asterisk clap, clap, clap. Asterisk this time. The wind elemental plane, water elemental plane, and fire elemental plane connections to the mortal plane were all severed. Only now did Ale leave in satisfaction. What excuse should I use? A sudden dimensional quake shattered the dimensional barrier, causing a temporary loss of connections between all the planes. This was especially true for the elemental planes. It'll probably take at least 3 to 5 months before we can reconnect. Yep, this isn't bad.